For most people, the word Olmec immediately brings to mind the colossal stone heads, works that are both strikingly realistic and deeply impressive, standing as symbols of an ancient culture gazing across 3 millennia into the modern age. Yet, unlike in the past, these sculptures are no longer attributed to a mysterious and unknown people. Thanks to the dedicated work of Mexican and North American archaeologists, the identity and development of this civilization have become much clearer. Today, it is well established that the Olmec culture thrived in the Gulf lowlands of southeastern Mexico between about 1500 and 400 BC, marking a crucial stage in the history of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The Olmecs were not only pioneers of their own time, but also the creators of the earliest civilization in the region, stretching across central and southern Mexico and northern Central America. In fact, they are counted among the very small group of 6 societies in world history that developed as truly original, self-standing civilizations. The earliest civilizations to appear in different parts of the world are called pristine civilizations, meaning they developed on their own without borrowing from earlier models. Among them are ancient Egypt and Sumer in the Near East, the Indus civilization in what is now India and Pakistan, the Shang dynasty in China, and the Chavin culture in Peru. The Olmecs are especially noteworthy because they were the only civilization to emerge in the tropical lowland forests, making their case a unique example in the study of how civilizations arise. Today, the Olmecs are most famous for their artistic achievements. Their massive stone monuments and finely crafted small objects made from jadeite and other precious stones show their extraordinary skill. Beyond their art, they were the first Native American society to build monumental architectural centers, to gather in organized towns and cities, and to develop a sophisticated artistic style in durable materials like stone. These accomplishments point to advanced social, political, economic, and religious systems, which led archaeologist Michael D. Coe to describe them as America's first civilization and the mother culture of Mesoamerica, a model for all later societies in Mexico and Central America. While not every scholar agrees with this assessment, growing evidence has persuaded nearly everyone except the strongest skeptics. What makes the Olmecs a true civilization? According to French archaeologist Christine Niederberger, civilizations appear with the rise of cities that act as regional hubs of integration. She outlines 6 features that define such societies: organized political and religious power, visible social hierarchy, planned public buildings, groups of highly specialized craftsmen, control and participation in long-distance trade networks, and complex intellectual achievements such as codified symbols or iconography to record ideas and events permanently. San Lorenzo, the earliest Olmec city, displayed all of these traits centuries before any other place in the Americas. So who were the Olmecs? For our purposes, they can be described simply as the people who lived along the southern Gulf Coast of Mexico between 1500 and 400 BC. Many distinct local communities existed in this region, yet they shared cultural practices and a recognizable artistic tradition we now call Olmec. Unfortunately, almost no Olmec human remains have survived because the acidic tropical soils of southern Veracruz and Tabasco quickly dissolve bone. Still, their artists sometimes carved realistic portraits of their own people. These images suggest individuals resembling today's local indigenous groups: short, muscular bodies, broad noses, slightly slanted eyes with epicanthic folds, full lips, short necks, and straight black hair. Their language is unknown, though some linguists, such as Lyle Campbell and Terence Kaufman, argue that they spoke early Mixozoquian dialects, the ancestors of modern Papaluca languages still present in the area. Others disagree, proposing instead a Proto-Mayan language, or something different altogether. Given Mesoamerica's long-standing diversity of languages, it is unlikely that everyone in the Olmec region spoke the same tongue. The discovery of the first colossal head at Tres Zapotes in Veracruz more than a century ago sparked intense speculation about the Olmecs' origins. Over the years, they were variously linked to Africans, Egyptians, Nubians, Phoenicians, Atlanteans, Chinese, Japanese, and other supposed travelers from distant lands. Yet the reality is far simpler and more convincing. The Olmecs were Native Americans who developed a distinctive culture in southeastern Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Archaeological research shows their traditions grew out of earlier local societies, with no evidence of major foreign influence. No genuine Old World artifact has ever been found at an Olmec site or anywhere else in Mesoamerica. We also do not know what name, if any, these people used to describe themselves as a collective group. There is no proof that they viewed themselves as a single ethnic identity, and it is doubtful that someone from one village thought of people living beyond a short walk as part of their own community. Even so, the cultural similarities among these neighboring societies are strong enough that modern scholars treat them as one broad culture. When the Spanish arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs, who spoke Nahuatl, referred to the people of the Gulf Coast as Olmeca Huixtotin, meaning people of the land of rubber and people of the salt water. Although those groups were not directly related to their earlier counterparts, archaeologists mistakenly extended the name Olmec to the much older civilization. Despite occasional suggestions for change, this label has remained the standard term for the culture that flourished during the formative period. When Olmec artifacts first reached European and Mexican collections in the 19th century, they were mistakenly linked to the Aztecs, the Maya, or even to distant cultures such as the Chinese. It was not until 1932 that George C. Vaillant of the American Museum of Natural History correctly recognized both their antiquity and their origins in the Gulf lowlands of southern Mexico. Just a few years later, in 1939, Matthew W. Sterling launched a 7-year program of groundbreaking excavations across Veracruz, Tabasco, and Chiapas, aimed at uncovering the Olmec civilization and firmly establishing its place in history. With the support of the Smithsonian Institution and the National Geographic Society, Sterling, working with his wife Marion, photographer Richard Stewart, and archaeologist Philip Drucker, systematically investigated every site known to contain colossal heads or other sculptures in the Olmec style. Their work took them to Tres Zapotes, Cerro de las Mesas, La Venta, Izapa, and San Lorenzo. Findings at Cerro de las Mesas and Izapa turned out to be from a later period, but the sites of Tres Zapotes, La Venta, and San Lorenzo revealed numerous Olmec sculptures and remarkable caches of offerings buried beneath plazas and temples. Sterling's team succeeded in mapping the cultural territory of the Olmecs, much as we understand it today, but they were unable to pin down the civilization's true age. Sterling argued that the Olmecs predated the great classic cultures of Teotihuacan and the Maya, while Drucker maintained that they were contemporaries. Most archaeologists sided with Drucker, assuming that such advanced art and architecture could not have existed before the Classic period. The well-known Mayanist J.E.S. Thompson went so far as to claim the Olmecs belonged to the post-Classic era, after the decline of the Classic centers. The matter was finally settled in 1955 when a University of California, Berkeley team led by Robert Heiser, Philip Drucker, and Robert Squire returned to La Venta. Their focus was Complex A, the sacred precinct north of the Great Pyramid, where Sterling had already uncovered unusual earthen structures and lavish offerings of jade and exotic materials. Through careful excavation, they identified 4 distinct building phases, each containing charcoal remains suitable for the newly developed method of radiocarbon dating. The results astonished many. La Venta was already flourishing by 800 BC and was abandoned in the 5th century BC, centuries before the Classic period even began. The radiocarbon dates confirmed Sterling's intuition and overturned decades of scholarly doubt. In the 1960s, attention shifted to San Lorenzo and the nearby Rio Chiquito, a branch of the Coatzacoalcos River. Michael D. Coe and his colleagues began their fieldwork in 1966, but San Lorenzo had first drawn interest back in 1945, when Sterling and Marion heard stories of a massive stone eye protruding from the ground near the village of Tenochtitlan. Their visit revealed the eye to be part of a colossal head. They returned in 1946 with Drucker and Stewart, and within months had uncovered more than 20 stone monuments, including the 5 largest and best preserved colossal heads known. Still, Sterling could not establish their age, a puzzle that had fascinated Coe since his student days at Harvard. Coe suspected that the San Lorenzo heads were older than those at La Venta and Tres Zapotes, even though they were technically more refined. To prove it, he launched the Yale University Rio Chiquito Archaeological Ecological Project between 1966 and 1968. The project produced the first securely dated Olmec ceramic sequence, the first complete map of an Olmec center, and valuable context for dating abandoned monuments. It also yielded detailed studies of San Lorenzo's architectural development and every major category of artifact recovered, while contributing a rare ethnographic and ethno-archaeological study of a modern farming community in Veracruz to shed light on ancient lifeways. San Lorenzo remained largely untouched after the Yale project, aside from occasional looting, until 1991, when Ann Cyphers initiated a new phase of research under the direction of Mexico's National Autonomous University, UNAM. The publications from her excavations are still being released, with early volumes already challenging some long-held assumptions and likely to revise others in the future. Meanwhile, La Venta's modern fate became intertwined with Mexico's oil industry. The site rests on a salt dome, a geological marker for petroleum deposits, and foreign oil companies had already begun exploring the area when Franz Blum and Oliver Lafarge visited in 1926. By the time Sterling and Drucker started digging there in 1940, oil exploration had intensified, culminating in the late 1950s with the construction of a Pemex refinery at the site. The development inflicted severe damage. Mounds were destroyed for an airstrip, bulldozers flattened the top of the Great Pyramid to make way for a park complete with a windsock, and a red light district grew at its base. Thanks to the efforts of Tabasco's celebrated poet Carlos Pellicer, the most important sculptures were saved and transferred to an open-air museum in Villahermosa, where they remain on display today. In the late 1960s, Robert Fleischer and Philip Drucker returned to La Venta with students from Berkeley to carry out limited excavations. Their work helped resolve several outstanding questions and provided new insights into the site, while also drawing attention to the ongoing destruction that was threatening its survival. Unfortunately, after the Yale and Berkeley projects, serious field research in the Olmec heartland came to a halt for nearly 2 decades. Although a handful of small digs were conducted at Tres Zapotes and La Venta in the 1970s, looters were far more active than professional archaeologists. As demand for Olmec figurines, ceramics, sculptures, and jade objects grew in national and international markets, local farmers and professional treasure hunters turned to looting. This illicit digging, which continues even today, has devastated sites and stripped artifacts of their archaeological context, leaving museums and private collections filled with objects disconnected from their historical meaning. Protests by both archaeologists and the public did little to slow the damage until 1986, when the Instituto de Cultura de Tabasco and the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, INAH, created a protected archaeological zone at La Venta. The state purchased more than 100 hectares of the site's core, fenced it off, removed modern houses, built paths for visitors, and placed replicas of stone monuments where they had originally been found. The bars and brothels that had once served refinery workers and visiting archaeologists gave way to a museum and visitor center. These measures preserved an irreplaceable part of the world's cultural heritage from being lost forever. Tres Zapotes also remained largely untouched after Sterling's team left in 1941. It was not until 30 years later that a young Mexican scholar, Ponciano Ortiz, opened small test trenches there. His goal was to establish a reliable chronological framework for the site, something Sterling had been unable to achieve. Ortiz succeeded in building a ceramic sequence based on changes in pottery form, decoration, and clay recipes over time. Afterward, he expanded his research to other sites in the region, including El Manatí, which would later prove to be of great importance. While archaeologists worked in the field, art historians and anthropologists began to concentrate on Olmec art and symbolism. The Mexican painter and collector Miguel Covarrubias was a pioneer in this area during the 1940s. Through his detailed descriptions and illustrations of small Olmec artifacts, many of which he acquired for his private collection, now housed in Mexico's National Museum of Anthropology, he introduced Olmec art to both scholars and collectors. His observations about the distinctive Olmec style and its antiquity have stood the test of time. After his early death in 1957, Beatriz de la Fuente and Elizabeth Benson carried forward this line of study, shaping the field of Olmec art into the modern era. At the same time, Michael D. Coe and his students, including Peter Geralaman and Carl Taub, focused on interpreting Olmec religion as expressed in art. Their efforts, often referred to as the Yale School of Olmec iconography, highlighted the way art reflected a worldview that united the natural environment, human society, and the spirit world. For the Olmecs, the unseen spiritual realm was just as real and powerful as maize fields, jaguars, or human adversaries. The 16th century Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún questioned his Aztec informants about the people and land of southern Veracruz and Tabasco. They described it as Olmen, meaning the rubber country, or as Tlalocan, the place of wealth. According to them, its inhabitants, the Olmeca Huixtoten, lived in a land of abundance, filled with riches, flowers, and prosperity. Spanish sailors, thinking more practically, called it the Sotavento, or Leeward Coast, a name still used today. The exact boundaries of Aztec Olmen are uncertain, but it probably stretched across about 10,000 square kilometers, covering the Papaloapan, Coatzacoalcos, and Tonalá river basins, along with the Tuxtla Mountains that rise above them like a natural pyramid framed by lowland valleys. Most scholars equate this Aztec concept of Olmen with the Olmec heartland. though some question whether the people living in the Tuxtlas during the formative period were fully part of Olmec society. Recent research has found little evidence there for large settlements, monumental sculpture, or strong ties to the wider Mesoamerican world. Although Olmec sculptors used basalt from the mountains, it may have come from boulders washed down into the foothills rather than being quarried directly. Even Tres Zapotes, long thought to be a key Olmec center on the western slopes of the Tuxtlas, was little more than a village before the decline of Olmec culture around 400 BC. For this reason, the true Olmec core was concentrated in the Coatzacoalcos and Tonalá river basins and the nearby hills south and east of the Tuxtlas. This central zone extended from the Gulf of Mexico to the mountains of Oaxaca and Chiapas, and southward across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. The mountains have always posed serious barriers to travel, their steep canyons carrying fast, unnavigable rivers, while the low hills of the Isthmus offered routes as passable in ancient times as they are today by road and rail. The environment across Olmen varied but shared key traits. It was hot, humid, and rich in plant and animal life. The low elevations meant that frost never threatened crops, and temperatures typically stayed between 20 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius. High humidity and little evaporation made the heat oppressive for both locals and outsiders. Rainfall was abundant, and rivers, streams, and wetlands were everywhere. The mountains facing the Gulf collected enormous amounts of precipitation. Most rain fell between May and November, but even in the so-called dry season, nortes, storms blowing in from the Gulf, were frequent, leaving only March and April as truly dry months. The Coatzacoalcos and Tonalá river basins formed a landscape of rivers, tributaries, levees, swamps, ridges, and plateaus. Seasonal flooding has always been central to life there. Heavy summer rains swelled the rivers until they overflowed, covering the land with water. By September, pastures that supported cattle in May were transformed into vast lakes better suited to fishing. As the rains eased in November, the waters withdrew, and the rivers returned to their channels until the cycle began again the following year. Rivers, streams, and lagoons have always shaped daily life in the Olmec region. Before the construction of modern bridges and highways in the 1980s, transport was almost entirely by riverboats and dugout canoes. These waterways were also once abundant sources of food, providing fish, turtles, caimans, manatees, mollusks, shrimp, and other valuable protein, until pollution and overfishing in the 20th century severely reduced their numbers. The most fertile farmlands have always been the natural levees along rivers, enriched each year by silt deposited during seasonal floods. Elevated ridges, plateaus, and levees have long been preferred for settlements because they not only avoid flood damage, but also offer good agricultural land, access to wood for building and cooking, and resources for craft production. In ancient times, these uplands were covered by dense tropical forests, but centuries of slash-and-burn farming have left behind low secondary growth, known locally as acahual. The tropical lowlands of Olmen remain a dynamic environment, constantly altered by both natural and human forces. Salt domes push the ground upward, sea levels rise and flood coastlines, rivers change course, and forests are cleared for cultivation. The Tuxtla Mountains, although lacking large formative period populations or true Olmec centers, were an imposing presence and visible from all the major Olmec sites. 4 volcanoes dominate the range: San Martin Tuxtla, San Martin Pahapan, Santa Marta, and Pelon. Santa Marta appears dormant, but San Martin's violent eruption in 1793 proved how unpredictable the landscape can be. Lake Catemaco, a volcanic crater lake at the heart of the Tuxtlas, was an attractive setting for early farmers and may have held sacred meaning for the Olmecs. Archaeology shows that repeated volcanic eruptions disrupted settlement, and in the 7th century, BC, one ashfall was so severe that much of the area was abandoned for generations. Despite these hazards, the Olmecs quarried basalt from Cerro Tintepec and obtained kaolin clay and volcanic ash to use in ceramics. The mountains also had deep symbolic significance. They were regarded as the dwelling places of deities who controlled human life, and they likely inspired the temple pyramids at La Venta. At San Martin Pajapan, the Olmecs even built a shrine on the summit, centered on a remarkable sculpture of a young ruler engaged in the act of creation. By the time of the Spanish conquest in 1519, the western portion of Olmen had been absorbed into the Aztec Empire, which maintained commercial ties with groups further east. 16th century records, including the Codex Mendoza and Sahagun's Florentine Codex, provide valuable descriptions of the region. The Mendoza, a colonial copy of an earlier Aztec tribute list, describes Toxtepec, covering the Papaloapan Basin and part of the Tuxtlas, as one of the richest and most heavily taxed provinces. Every 6 months, it was required to send to Tenochtitlan thousands of fine cotton garments, including mantas and women's tunics. Annual tribute also included elaborate warrior costumes, feathered shields, gold ornaments, crystal and amber jewelry, vast quantities of cacao, and an astonishing 16,000 balls of rubber. This highlights the province's wealth in cotton production, while gold and crystal were likely gathered from streams in the Sierra de Oaxaca, and prized feathers and amber came from Chiapas or Guatemala. Sahagun's Aztec informants recalled Olmen as a land overflowing with wealth: cacao and spices, rubber, flowers, feathers, gemstones, turquoise, gold, and silver. They described its inhabitants as richly dressed, with women renowned for embroidery and weaving, and noted their fine jewelry and sandals, some even made from rubber. To the Spaniards, however, the true value of the land was measured differently. Feathers, rubber, and cacao mattered little to them. Gold and forced labor were what they sought. Hernán Cortés quickly dispatched expeditions to search for gold in Toxtepec, even before the Aztec capital had fully fallen. He claimed vast tracts of the region for himself, known as the Marquesado del Valle, and established New Spain's first sugar plantation in the Tuxtlas, worked by enslaved Africans. Around the same time, Gonzalo de Sandoval and companions founded Villa de Espiritu Santo, near the mouth of the Coatzacoalcos River. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a participant in the conquest and one of the town's first settlers, later expressed bitter disappointment. The expected wealth failed to materialize. Gold deposits were scarce, and the indigenous population, once numbering perhaps 50,000, was decimated within decades by disease and exploitation. By 1541, Diaz himself moved on to Guatemala, and by 1580, Villa de Espiritu Santo had dwindled to just 20 Spaniards and around 3,000 indigenous inhabitants, a fraction of the thriving communities that had once filled the Olmec heartland. Although people certainly lived in Olmen during the Paleo-Indian period, the earliest confirmed archaeological remains date to around 5,100 BC. At that time, farming communities settled along the edge of a former lagoon at San Andres, Tabasco, about 15 kilometers south of the modern Gulf of Mexico shoreline and just northeast of La Venta. The site is especially valuable because its waterlogged soils preserved numerous plant remains, and organic materials. In 1986, William F. Rust identified early pre-Olmec occupations there, and later research by Kevin O. Pope, Mary E. D. Pohl, and a team of specialists in archaeology, geology, and botany provided new insights into the ancestors of the La Venta Olmecs. By applying advanced methods such as deep soil coring, flotation, and water screening, they recovered pollen from an early form of maize, alongside signs of the first clearings of tropical forest. This maize, originally domesticated in western Mexico, most likely Guerrero, where DNA studies trace its ancestor Teosinte, quickly adapted to the warm, humid lowlands of Olmen. The soil cores also contained pollen from manioc, probably domesticated, dating to about 4,600 BC. Later, tropical peoples relied on its starchy tubers as a daily staple, and some scholars suggest it may already have been a key food in Mesoamerican diets well before 800 BC. By 2500 BC, the San Andres farmers and their neighbors were living along an estuary within the Grijalva River Delta and practicing a mixed subsistence strategy of farming and foraging. They cultivated maize, sunflower for its oil-rich seeds, and cotton for fiber, while still exploiting wild plants such as squash. Rust argued they also used pottery, though later researchers suggest his pottery fragments may have come from later occupations. Even so, the community surely used perishable tools such as canoes, digging sticks, nets, and ritual objects made from wood and other organic materials. With luck, future excavations may recover such fragile remains in sealed, waterlogged contexts, much like those preserved at the shrine of El Manatee. Paleobotanist Barbara Layden identified the maize from San Andres as a small popcorn variety with 10 to 14 rows of kernels, similar to contemporaneous finds from Rio Alto in Ecuador and to modern Argentine popcorn. This type of maize was well suited to wet tropical soils, though it produced smaller yields compared to later varieties. Its resilience would have been highly valued by early Olmen farmers. For decades, scholars believed that Olmec culture did not take recognizable form until around 1200 BC. But evidence now suggests its roots extend back at least to 1600 to 1500 BC. At that time, ritual offerings were being deposited at El Manatee, a sacred spring shrine southeast of San Lorenzo in the Coatzacoalcos Basin. These activities may have been conducted by people from San Lorenzo, the earliest true Olmec center and perhaps the birthplace of Olmec art and culture. The identity of these first Olmecs is still debated. Some scholars argue they were Mocaya migrants from the Pacific coast of Chiapas, who brought new maize varieties and social complexity, while others believe Olmec culture developed locally without significant outside influence. The question remains unresolved due to limited evidence from before 1500 BC. Cerro Manatee rises above the wetlands about 17 kilometers from San Lorenzo. Since 1989, Ponciano Ortiz, Maria del Carmen Rodriguez, and their colleagues have uncovered there a remarkable record of early Olmec ritual practice. El Manatee is a natural shrine where freshwater springs emerge at the base of the hill, a setting the Olmecs viewed as sacred because both water and mountains were associated with divine power. Excavations revealed 3 distinct ritual episodes in which worshippers deposited offerings into a pond beneath the spring. In the earliest phase, 1600 to 1500 BC, they laid down a platform of sandstone slabs, some carved with grooves, and placed pottery vessels, stone bowls, fire-cracked stones, finely crafted jadeite celts and beads, and 9 rubber balls upon it. The presence of jadeite and rubber at such an early date surprised many scholars. Jadeite, a dense blue-green stone, was prized for its symbolic link to maize and fertility. Until the discoveries at El Manatí, most archaeologists thought it was not in use before 800 BC. Later studies identified its source in Guatemala's Motagua Valley, nearly 1,000 kilometers away, showing that long-distance trade networks already existed in this early period. The finds at El Manatí demonstrate that even at its beginnings, Olmec culture was embedded in far-reaching ritual, artistic, and exchange traditions. The discovery of rubber balls at El Manatí caused considerable excitement among scholars, because although the very name Olmen means land of rubber, no clear evidence of rubber use had been found in formative period Mesoamerican sites until then. Ortiz and Rodriguez unearthed 9 examples, demonstrating both the antiquity of the ballgame, discussed in detail later, and its sacred character from the very beginning. The earliest offerings were sealed beneath a natural accumulation of peat-like deposits, preserving them in a secure context. A century later, during the Manatee B phase, 1500 to 1200 BC, pilgrims placed polished jadeite axes and other stones in deliberate patterns on the spring floor. Some were arranged like flower petals pointing upward, others set in groups aligned with the cardinal directions, while 11 were carefully laid flat in a row. Rubber balls continued to be added, but utilitarian items such as pottery no longer appeared in these offerings. A final ritual phase took place during the San Lorenzo era, which will be discussed separately. El Manatí was a remote shrine, isolated from major settlements. The nearby hamlet of Macayal was far too small to account for the wealth of objects deposited there, suggesting the participants likely came from San Lorenzo, then the largest community in the area. Excavations at San Lorenzo itself have revealed 3 stages of occupation before it rose to prominence around 1200 BC. The Ojochi phase, 1500 to 1350. BC, the Bajío phase, 1350 to 1250 BC, and the Chicharras phase, 1250 to 1150 BC. Although buried beneath later layers, evidence shows that by 1250 BC San Lorenzo already covered about 20 hectares. Surveys of the surrounding 400 square kilometers identified over 100 Bajío and Chicharras phase settlements arranged in a 3-tiered hierarchy, with San Lorenzo at the top. These included 9 small villages and many hamlets and farmsteads, most situated on high ground safe from flooding yet close to water and transportation routes. Even at this early stage, San Lorenzo appears to have dominated the region, possibly drawing tribute in food and goods from its dependents. Pottery from the Ojochi phase included everyday utilitarian wares as well as finely crafted vessels for ceremonial feasts. Shapes included bowls, thin-walled techomates, gourd-like jars with narrow mouths, and jars with flaring necks. Decoration techniques such as red slip, gadrooning, punctation, grooving, and alternating polished and roughened surfaces added variety. These ceramics closely resemble those from the Manatee A phase, as well as contemporary styles in Tabasco and Chiapas. During the Bajío phase, 1350 to 1250 BC, pottery developed from Ojochi forms and reflected a period of population growth. Techomates remained common, but were joined by flat-bottomed bowls, vessels with tall, out-flaring rims, and bottles likely used for drinking or rituals. Similar forms appeared as far away as central and western Mexico. Bajío pottery also introduced the striking black and white firing technique that would remain popular for centuries. For the first time, large hollow figurines of human infants appeared, a style that later became emblematic of Olmec ritual art. The Bajío phase also saw the construction of earth platforms, evidence of leaders with the authority to mobilize organized labor for public projects. The Chicharas phase, 1250 to 1150 BC, marked a turning point in San Lorenzo's development. Population growth accelerated, and ceramics underwent significant change. Earlier vessel types declined, while black and white pottery increased, joined by new styles such as mojonera black and a distinctive white ware. These types continued into the subsequent San Lorenzo phase, the height of Olmec culture in the city. Chicharas deposits contain unmistakable signs of emerging Olmec tradition, including both hollow and solid clay figurines and early stone sculpture. One solid figurine shows a pregnant seated woman with painted red skirt, while a fragment of stone carving depicts two parallel ropes painted in red hematite. Rope motifs later appear in Olmec art as part of headdresses on colossal heads, or as ties securing stone blocks, symbols of rulership and power. The fragment's broken condition may reflect the later Olmec practice of intentionally destroying monuments to reuse their stone. By 1200 BC, the Olmec world was undergoing a period of intense transformation. Processes that had begun centuries earlier came together to form a dynamic new civilization unlike anything previously seen in Mesoamerica. All 6 features that Christine Niederberger defined as markers of civilization: political and religious authority, social ranking, monumental architecture, specialized crafts, trade networks, and codified symbolic expression, were present in embryonic form. San Lorenzo, as the primary center, was the cradle of this cultural flowering. By 900 BC, San Lorenzo had become the first true city of Mesoamerica and possibly the earliest urban center anywhere in the Americas. Covering some 500 hectares and housing several thousand residents, it displayed all the defining traits of urban life as outlined by Christine Niederberger: centralized political and religious authority, social hierarchy, carefully planned public architecture, specialized craft production, active participation in long-distance trade, and advanced symbolic systems. Archaeologists William T. Sanders and David Webster have described San Lorenzo and its counterpart La Venta as regal ritual cities, centers with strong ceremonial roles, moderate populations, relatively decentralized leadership, and limited economic complexity. This model fits not only the Olmec capitals, but also many later Mesoamerican cities, with only a few exceptions such as Teotihuacan, Tula, and Tenochtitlan, surpassing it to become massive metropolitan centers. San Lorenzo was built on a long ridge overlooking the floodplains of the lower Coatzacoalcos Basin, about 60 kilometers from the Gulf of Mexico. 3,000 years ago, rivers encircled the ridge, forming a natural island. The main settlement sat at its center, with secondary nodes like El Remolino and Loma del Zapotes positioned at key river junctions on its edges. This location gave San Lorenzo strategic advantages. The ridge was high enough to escape flooding, yet close to fertile levee farmlands and rich aquatic resources, while fresh springs at its summit provided excellent drinking water. In addition, nearby deposits of asphalt, hematite, sandstone, and limestone supplied valuable materials. By controlling the river junctures, San Lorenzo's rulers also commanded the main transport routes of the region. These advantages made it a natural hub of political and economic power. Archaeological excavations show that San Lorenzo's cultural sequence begins around 1150 BC. The site went through 3 main phases of Olmec occupation: the San Lorenzo phase, 1150 to 900-800 BC, the Nakaste phase, 900–800 to 700 BC, and the Palangana phase, 600 to 400 BC. Afterward, the ridge and surrounding area were abandoned until late classic settlers reoccupied it more than 1,000 years later. Excavations at El Remolino, near modern Tenochtitlan village, provided thousands of sherds and charcoal samples that helped date the San Lorenzo phase. Pottery from this era blankets the entire ridge, overlaying earlier deposits from Ojochi, Bajío, and Chicharas occupations. Small variations in pottery styles allow archaeologists to distinguish San Lorenzo A and B subphases, though their precise duration remains unclear. San Lorenzo ceramics have been found across the Coatzacoalcos Basin and beyond, evidence of a large population and wide cultural reach. While continuing earlier traditions, two distinctive decorated wares appeared for the first time: calzadas carved and Xochitepec white. Calzadas carved vessels, usually black or gray bowls, were decorated with deeply incised motifs like flame eyebrows, crossed bands, and paw wing patterns, often highlighted with red hematite. Xochitepec white, made from fine kaolin clay, produced thin-walled tecumates, squash-shaped jars, and deep bowls that likely served elite dining and ritual purposes. Pots of this type have been identified not only locally, but also in distant regions such as Oaxaca and the Basin of Mexico, showing San Lorenzo's wide influence. A related type, limon carved incist, was found only at San Lorenzo, characterized by incised curvilinear patterns and black and white firing effects. The Nakaste phase followed the collapse of San Lorenzo as an Olmec capital. Pottery styles shifted significantly, and the hallmark ceramics of the earlier phase disappeared. These changes may indicate the arrival of outsiders who displaced or absorbed the old population, though it is also possible they represent cultural evolution among the locals who remained. In any case, the Nakaste phase produced no monuments or major architecture, and the site was abandoned after only a few generations. By the Palangana phase, 600 to 400 BC, San Lorenzo had declined to a modest village. A few small mounds were built around plazas, including one of the earliest known ball courts in Mesoamerica, but the settlement covered only 20 hectares, far smaller than its earlier expanse of 500 hectares. Its relationship to the flourishing Olmec capital at Venta is uncertain, but San Lorenzo was so diminished that it may not even have been relevant to Venta's rulers. The last Olmec inhabitants left around 400 BC. When new settlers arrived more than a millennium later during the Villa Alta phase, they must have marveled at the colossal stone heads and monuments scattered across their fields, creating legends about the long-vanished builders of this once great city. For modern visitors, San Lorenzo can feel underwhelming compared to the monumental remains of central Mexico, Oaxaca, or the Maya lowlands. There are no towering pyramids or elaborately decorated facades, and its most impressive sculptures have long since been moved to museums in Mexico City and Jalapa. A recently built site museum, located on the grounds of the former Yale Project Camp in Tenochtitlan Village, now houses newly discovered pieces, including the latest colossal head. Walking across the plateau today reveals only modest earth mounds from the Palangana and Villa Alta phases, along with scattered basalt fragments from broken monuments or ancient drains. The true story of San Lorenzo lies buried beneath present-day cattle pastures and soybean fields. Today, most visitors arrive from the north, driving in along the modern road from Acayucan. Just 3 decades ago, travelers still disembarked by boat at Tenochtitlan village. In ancient times, Entry points varied depending on direction of travel. One formal approach was through a port complex at the southern end of the plateau, near modern Loma del Zapote, with similar entrances perhaps existing at El Remolino to the north and elsewhere. One can imagine an Olmec trader returning from a successful mission, pulling his canoe ashore at Loma del Zapote before making the climb to the plateau to pay tribute to his ruler. Loma del Zapote, about 5 kilometers from the plateau summit, controlled a strategic fork in the river system. Archaeologists have given different names to its zones, including Potrero Nuevo, Rancho El Azuzul, and Las Irenta. Here, the visitor would have encountered a terraced acropolis marked by stone monuments, 2 massive causeways, each 500 meters long and 60 meters wide, and an extended residential district. The causeways doubled as flood control dikes, while also providing raised access routes from the river. Excavations by Ann Cyphers uncovered remains of leveled house platforms and ceremonial zones with multi-monument displays. One ritual setting included a mutilated statue of a seated or kneeling figure placed on a volcanic ash pavement facing the sunset, with the bones of a possible sacrificial victim and pottery offerings beneath. Another sculpture, now badly damaged, depicted a seated human with one arm raised and a crossed-leg posture reminiscent of a figure painted in the Oxtititlan cave in Guerrero, where a man sits atop a throne. Perhaps the most striking tableau was found at Rancho El Azuzul, 2 nearly identical kneeling twin figures facing the rising sun, confronting a pair of snarling jaguars recarved from earlier monuments. The twins' headdresses had been deliberately defaced, but the scene evokes the widespread Mesoamerican myth of the hero twins and their battles against the underworld, symbolizing divine ancestry and royal legitimacy. Other sculptures once attributed to Potrero Nuevo also appear to come from Loma del Zapote, including a seated human clutching a snake, a serpent carved in the round, a jaguar attacking or perhaps mating with a human, and a throne supported by dwarf-like figures. All emphasize rulership, ritual power, and links to the supernatural, fitting themes to display at the city's ceremonial gateway. From here, our imagined visitor would climb the slopes of the plateau, passing through densely settled terraces. These terraces, hidden under jungle until ranchers cleared the land in the 1980s, contained houses and workshops carved into the hillside. Some dwellings were simple pole and thatch houses, while others used compacted earth construction. Many inhabitants were artisans, likely occupying a social position between rural villagers and the nobility at the top of the plateau. One enduring mystery is the appearance of San Lorenzo's summit during its height. The visible mounds today date to after 600 BC, and excavations beneath them found no earlier stone buildings, though perishable wattle and daub structures may once have existed. Evidence suggests that the plateau surface was an expansive plaza paved with red sand and yellow gravel, lined with stone sculptures sheltered by thatched roofs. At least 10 colossal heads and several thrones were arranged along a north-south axis, possibly forming a grand processional way. These monuments, likely portraits of rulers and their seats of power, would have served as a dynastic display, reinforcing royal authority and connecting living leaders to their ancestors. Unlike later Mesoamerican cities, which favored plaza groups of mounds, San Lorenzo's public architecture emphasized large flat platforms. Indeed, the plateau itself was the largest platform of all. Topographic surveys by G. Ray Kreutzer revealed that the plateau's outline is highly irregular, with long ridges extending outward on several sides. Michael D. Coe proposed that these ridges were intentional constructions, shaping the plateau into a giant bird effigy. The central plateau as the body, the north and south ridges as wings, the western ridges as a tail, and an unfinished eastern ridge as the head. Excavations in the Group D ridge uncovered 7 meters of artificial fill, suggesting deliberate construction. Though Coe's Great Bird Flying East hypothesis has been challenged, most notably by Ann Cyphers, who sees the ridges as natural or the result of gradual building activity. He argued that the Olmecs would have recognized and understood the symbolic form, even if visible only from above. Rituals may have been performed along its imagined wings and body, embodying cosmological symbolism. Once dismissed, the idea of San Lorenzo as a giant effigy is now taken more seriously, as it reflects the Olmec's creative blending of landscape, ritual, and power. The western side of the San Lorenzo Plateau has long been recognized as a concentration point for monuments. Since Matthew Stirling's excavations, more than 50 sculptures and fragments have been found in the area known as Groups C, D, and E. Recent work by Ann Cyphers has shown why this area was so richly endowed. It was the royal compound, the residence of San Lorenzo's rulers. Within this zone stood the so-called Red Palace, a workshop where artisans shaped both monumental sculptures and everyday basalt tools, and several ritual spaces that included monuments and an aqueduct. The Red Palace itself was a substantial structure with red gravel floors and mud walls plastered with red sand. Builders also incorporated limestone, bentonite, and basalt details. Basalt elements included a massive columnar roof support, bench-shaped stair covers, and an elaborate curved drain running beneath the facade. While this drainage feature certainly had a practical purpose, it also carried symbolic meaning in Olmec ritual life. Many of the sculptures recovered in or near the compound were being reworked or set aside for reuse when the complex was abandoned. When the Yale team found some of these battered monuments in 1967, Michael Coe and his colleagues thought they were deliberately mutilated during a violent uprising that ended San Lorenzo's dynasty. Current evidence instead suggests this was a pre-Columbian sculptural yard, where artisans recycled older works, carved new monuments from fresh blocks or repurposed pieces, and even produced domestic grinding stones from fragments. Several monuments at San Lorenzo, including the jaguars from El Azuzul and 2 colossal heads carved from earlier thrones, show this practice of reworking. Recycling older sculptures may have been a practical solution when transporting new stone from distant quarries was too dangerous or costly, especially in unstable times. The workshop's location near the Red Palace implies that its craftsmen may have belonged to the ruling family itself, much like Maya scribes and sculptors who often came from noble lineages. Offerings of pottery, animals, and even infant sacrifices beneath monuments underscore the sacred character of their work. To the southeast, in Group E, stood a vast ritual stage dedicated to water, a resource both abundant and unpredictable in the Olmec landscape. This included a carefully engineered stone-lined aqueduct more than 170 meters long, accompanied by related monuments. Stirling had first noticed scattered U-shaped basalt troughs in 1946 and correctly suggested they were water conduits. 2 decades later, the Yale project uncovered an intact section still in place, excavated by engineer G. Ray Kreutzer. He recognized the technical sophistication of the system. Troughs were laid end-to-end on a graded surface with a precise 2% slope. Junctions for branch lines were built, and one cover even had an inspection hole for checking water flow. the aqueduct seems to have ended at Monument 9, a hollow boulder carved into the shape of a duck. Although its upper portion is missing, the wings, chest, and feet remain visible, decorated with designs representing blood or precious water. A smaller profile of a duck in flight is carved on its chest. A square opening on the side allowed the aqueduct to feed water into the hollow body, which then drained out through a small hole. This unusual monument may have served as a ritual basin where the ruler enacted his role as rainmaker and lord of the waters. Other sculptures found near the aqueduct reinforced themes of rulership and fertility. Monument 14, a large throne, was discovered in a patio beside an earthen platform. Monument 61, one of the most finely carved colossal heads, lay toppled on its side nearby. Monument 52, a dwarf-like seated figure with a cleft or jaguar face, sat close to the drain. His hollowed back resembles a trough stone, further linking him to water symbolism. The combination of aqueduct, monuments, and immense labor investment indicates that this was not simply a utilitarian project, but one of great ceremonial significance. Cyphers argues that San Lorenzo's final ruler built the system to channel spring water from the royal compound to the edge of the plateau, serving both daily needs and ritual purposes. Control over such a vital resource would have given the ruler immense authority, projecting his special connection with the divine forces governing rain and rivers. Public ceremonies held here would have bound the community together in shared devotion, reinforcing both the spiritual and political power of San Lorenzo's kings. Other aqueduct remains have been identified in different parts of the San Lorenzo plateau, though it is unlikely they were all in use at the same time. Anne Cyphers has suggested that the water table may have gradually dropped during the San Lorenzo phase, making earlier systems that tapped higher springs obsolete. Such shifts might even have forced rulers to move their royal residences from one sector of the plateau to another over the course of generations. Across the plateau lie more than 20 artificial depressions, known locally as lagunas, whose role in ancient water management remains debated. Michael Coe and I once proposed that some were borrow pits created to supply soil for platform building, while others may have functioned as cisterns or reservoirs during San Lorenzo times. We argued that Laguna 8, a large basin at the edge of the Group E ritual zone, served as an artificial water tank or ritual pool linked to the aqueduct. Cyphers, however, excavated the feature and contends it is a modern pond dug by ranchers in the 20th century. Yet this overlooks the fact that Laguna 8 was already present when Sterling uncovered Monument 14 in 1946, well before ranching operations reshaped the plateau. Hopefully, her final reports will help resolve the debate. From the perspective of an Olmec deity looking down on San Lorenzo, the plateau would have been alive with stone monuments. 124 have been documented so far, though many more surely remain buried. These range from modest carvings to the great colossal heads and Monument 14, a throne estimated at 28 tons. We cannot know how many stood on display at once, or whether some were permanent fixtures while others were moved out only for ceremonies. All of the basalt used came from Cerro Tintepec in the Tuxtla Mountains. Petrographic studies show 3 distinct types of stone. A fine-grained porphyritic basalt, type A, used for monuments and drain stones, and other varieties reserved for utilitarian items like manos and metatits. Traditionally, scholars have studied Olmec sculptures as isolated works of art. Yet Cyphers' excavations demonstrate that many were part of group scenes or tableaus. These installations may have stood in front of buildings, with permanent displays of colossal heads and thrones supplemented by smaller monuments added or removed depending on ritual needs. Some tableaus may even have evolved during the course of a ceremony. Monument 34, a kneeling man with sockets for movable wooden arms, suggests that figures could have been manipulated to dramatize ritual narratives. While some arrangements, like those at Loma del Zapote, were likely permanent, others may have been temporary displays designed to draw audiences again and again. These carvings were far more than decorative art. They embodied the Olmecs' vision of the divine, their ancestors, and the cosmos, while also serving as visible proof of rulers' authority. The production and delivery of a monument required enormous organization, quarrying basalt in the Tuxtlas 80 kilometers away, transporting it through rivers and dense forest, securing safe passage through contested lands, feeding and housing large labor crews for months, and coping with unpredictable weather. Every monument was thus a testament to both religious devotion and political power. Two main themes dominate San Lorenzo's sculpture: highly naturalistic human figures, often shown in ritual acts, and representations of animals. The animals range from realistic jungle creatures to fantastical hybrids. San Lorenzo's artists had a particular focus on felines, portraying jaguars, humans wearing jaguar skins, and humans transforming into jaguar-like beings. The present distribution of monuments shows they were concentrated in elite sectors around the plateau's edges. Only a handful remain intact. Most were damaged or already undergoing recycling. The relatively fresh surfaces of many pieces suggest they were shielded from the weather, probably under roofs or inside structures. Evidence from La Venta, such as traces of stucco and purplish paint on Colossal Head 4, further indicates that at least some Olmec sculptures were brightly painted, both for symbolic effect and to preserve the stone beneath. Olmec civilization cannot be fully understood without taking into account the rural settlements that sustained the great urban centers. For too long, scholarship has focused almost exclusively on the capitals with their striking monuments and architecture, leaving out the villages where the majority of Olmecs lived their daily lives. Recent surveys around San Lorenzo have begun to redress this imbalance, revealing a densely inhabited hinterland forming the core of the San Lorenzo realm. While its exact boundaries remain uncertain, it clearly encompassed at least the entire Coatzacoalcos basin. Within this realm, two main zones of settlement existed: an inner hinterland filled with tightly packed communities, and a more lightly populated outer hinterland farther afield. The communities in both zones varied in size and complexity, but were organized into a clear hierarchy. San Lorenzo stood at the top, supported by 4 nearby secondary centers strategically located at river junctions and other transportation nodes. To the south, Loma del Zapote and Las Camelias controlled access routes, while El Remolino served a similar role to the north. El Remolino, together with neighboring El Bajío, formed a large village that straddled the Rio Chiquito. Excavations in the stratified midden deposits exposed along the riverbank at El Remolino produced significant amounts of San Lorenzo pottery. In 1946, Philip Drucker even discovered a large basalt column in the riverbed, resembling the roof supports of the Red Palace, although its precise archaeological context could not be determined before the river reclaimed it. To the west, Estero Rabon guarded approaches to San Lorenzo. Finds here include fragments of Olmec sculptures, among them a detached human head and what may have been a throne. Archaeologists suspect that a 4th secondary center may yet be located east of San Lorenzo. Olmec farmers made use of nearly every elevated spot around the capital, even going so far as to build artificial islotes, small islands raised high enough to survive the annual floods. Stacy Simmons and Roberto Luna Gomez have identified 6 categories of settlement beneath the main centers and secondary nodes: large, medium, and small villages, large and small hamlets, and household-sized islots. In addition to these permanent communities, temporary shrines and seasonal fishing camps also dotted the landscape. All of these settlements were socially and politically subordinate to San Lorenzo, and most were abandoned with the end of the San Lorenzo phase. El Manatí continued to function as a shrine during the Mikhail A phase, 1200 to 1000 BC, corresponding to San Lorenzo's heyday. On one remarkable occasion, worshippers deposited a massive ritual offering composed largely of perishable materials that survived only because of the bog's waterlogged, oxygen-free conditions. The most extraordinary finds were 40 life-sized wooden busts carved from tropical cedar. These were accompanied by wooden scepters, sacrificial stone knives hafted into wooden handles with tar, rubber balls, lumps of hematite, knotted cords, woven mats, plant remains, nuts, fruit pits, and animal bones impregnated with hematite. More chilling were the remains of infants and children, almost certainly sacrificial victims, placed among the offerings. Ortiz and Rodriguez have suggested that the Olmecs may have chosen such objects deliberately for their ability to withstand decay in the protective bog waters, but they could hardly have imagined that the artifacts would endure for over 3 millennia. El Manatí was not the only shrine used for ritual deposits. At nearby La Merced, at least 3 offerings were placed in water, either standing or slow-moving. One deposit covered an area of about 30 meters on each side and contained more than 600 roughly shaped limestone celts. Though less finely worked than the jadeite celts of El Manatí, they were accompanied by hematite and pyrite mirrors, a finely carved 72-centimeter stela-like stone bearing a classic Olmec face, and a greenstone celt depicting a squalling infant known as El Bebé. Although San Lorenzo was clearly the leading political center of Olmen during the early formative period, it was not the only one. Other significant sites included La Venta, Tres Zapotes, Los Limus, Ojo de Agua, La Oaxaqueña, and possibly Laguna de los Cerros. For many years, scholars believed that San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes formed a neat sequence, a triumvirate of Olmec capitals rising and falling one after another. Research now shows that the picture is far more complex. Tres Zapotes and La Venta both reached their peak after San Lorenzo declined, but each also shows evidence of earlier occupations. La Venta, in particular, was already a powerful presence after 1000 BC, and many of its sculptures share striking motifs with those at San Lorenzo. While no clear pre-1000 BC layers have been excavated at La Venta itself, the nearby site of Isla Alor dates to that era. It seems likely that La Venta emerged as an important center soon after 1200 BC, and may even have contributed to San Lorenzo's fall, or, at the very least, profited greatly from it. The history of Tres Zapotes remained one of the great puzzles of Olmec archaeology until the University of Kentucky's Christopher Poole and his team began new surveys in 1995. They documented 3 small early formative communities within the boundaries of what later became a major epi-Olmec center around 400 to 300 BC. Definite Olmec remains at Tres Zapotes include 2 colossal heads, pottery closely resembling San Lorenzo styles, jadeite celts, perforated iron ore cubes, Olmec-style figurines, and a basalt column tomb enclosure similar to those at La Venta. The colossal heads are particularly controversial. Some scholars, such as Beatriz de la Fuente, argue that they differ so much in style and workmanship from earlier examples that they may represent the very latest echoes of the Olmec sculptural tradition. Others interpret them as regional variations, the kind of local adaptation one might expect on the Olmec frontier. Whatever the case, the site's jadeite celts, carved figurines, and column tombs show that Olmec traditions were alive there, though organized in a simpler, less centralized society compared to San Lorenzo or La Venta. Laguna de los Cerros lies at the southern edge of the Tuxtla foothills, spreading across about 40 hectares with at least 95 mounds, some rising as high as 30 meters. Most of these belong to the late Classic period, but the presence of 40 stone monuments suggests a significant formative occupation. Unfortunately, the site has long been misunderstood. When Alfonso Medellin Zenil excavated there in 1960, he found Classic period pottery beneath Olmec sculptures and concluded that both dated to AD 600 to 900. Today, we know that the Classic inhabitants probably relocated and revered much older monuments from the formative period. Unlike San Lorenzo and La Venta, Laguna de los Cerros lacks true colossal heads. Instead, it has two smaller and somewhat crude heads with grotesque features, curly hair, jaguar-like fanged mouths, and square plaque-like eyes. Among its most remarkable works is Monument 19, a finely carved standing male figure in a cape, reminiscent of Mediterranean statuary, though sadly missing its head. Another important piece, Monument 9, depicts a massive stone block bound tightly with ropes, originally topped by a now ruined human rider. The detail of the knots is so precise that it almost brings the scene to life. One can imagine an Olmec ruler seated atop the block, destined to become his throne, urging exhausted workers to drag it up the slope into his workshop. The theme of stone transport is fitting, for Medellin Zenil identified a sculptural workshop at nearby Llano del Jicaro. More recent excavations by Susan Gillespie confirmed this, uncovering unworked native boulders, unfinished monuments, tools, and debris from carving. It seems likely that Laguna de los Cerros and its satellite workshops provided raw materials, or even completed sculptures, for San Lorenzo and other centers on at least some occasions. Isolated Olmec-style monuments have also been found at sites such as La Isla, El Cardonal, Loma de la Piedra, Cuatotolapan, and Cruz del Milagro, near Laguna de los Cerros. Unfortunately, none have been excavated in stratified contexts, leaving it unclear whether these were independent Olmec communities, local satellite villages like Loma del Zapote and Estero Rabon, or simply outposts of sculpture production. Los Limus was one of the major Olmec centers, located deep in the isthmus of Tehuantepec, about 40 kilometers south of San Lorenzo. Archaeologist Hernando Gomez Rueda documented more than 800 closely packed mounds across an area of roughly 100 hectares, all dating to the early formative period. The only monument recovered so far is the famous greenstone figure known as the Lord of Los Limus, which portrays a seated youth holding a limp jaguar infant on his lap. Lightly incised faces on his shoulders and knees suggest divine associations, and the sculpture provided the basis for the so-called Los Limus hypothesis, an important interpretation of the Olmec pantheon discussed later. The modern story of this statue is almost as remarkable as the piece itself. Two children stumbled upon it while searching for a stone to crack palm nuts. Their family and neighbors began treating the figure as a miraculous apparition of the Virgin Mary. During the festival of the Virgin del Carmen, villagers dressed the figure in a silk cape, adorned it with paper flowers, and gave it the central position on an altar, even moving aside the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, Mexico's patron saint, because the matron of Los Limus, as they called her, was believed to be older and therefore more important. News of this unusual saint eventually reached Xalapa, where archaeologists arranged to move it to the State Museum. The villagers agreed only after officials settled a long-standing land dispute, built a school, and promised that the statue would be displayed publicly. Once installed, the Lord of Los Limus quickly became a centerpiece of the collection. The young discoverers even visited the museum, where they were celebrated by local schoolchildren. Yet the story did not end there. Years later, the sculpture was stolen in the night and believed to have entered the black market. Police later recovered it in a motel room in San Antonio, Texas, and it was safely returned to Xalapa, where it remains today, occasionally traveling abroad for major exhibitions of Olmec art. Another important site, La Oaxaqueña, lies on a bend of the Coatzacoalcos River about 27 kilometers south of San Lorenzo and 14 kilometers from Los Limus. Excavations led by Robert Cobian revealed large mounds and early formative pottery. Most striking is a massive ditch, 10 meters deep and 15 meters wide, encircling the site's core. This feature likely served as a fortification, making it the oldest known military construction in Mesoamerica and strong evidence that warfare played a role in Olmec society. No sculptures have been found at La Oaxaqueña itself, but the nearby site of Ojo de Agua produced a rounded basalt monument with concave depressions reminiscent of San Lorenzo carvings, along with fragments of Calzadas carved pottery. The theme of conflict leads directly to the question of San Lorenzo's collapse. We know only that the city fell sometime in the 10th century BC. The causes remain uncertain. Earlier, Michael Coe and others suggested that the monuments had all been deliberately destroyed in a single catastrophic event, either from invasion or internal revolt. More recent interpretations propose that many monuments were simply in the process of being recarved or reused when the site was abandoned. Still, why the work was left unfinished and why no successor emerged to San Lorenzo's final ruler are questions without answers. Explanations range from warfare, invasions, economic decline, and the rise of rival centers to environmental shifts that disrupted agriculture and trade routes. Geomorphological research by Mario Arturo Ortiz Perez has shown that during this period, the rivers around San Lorenzo began to change course. Such shifts would have undermined both trade and political power. The causes might include tectonic activity, sea level fluctuations, or heavy siltation from deforestation and agriculture. These natural changes, while not excluding other factors such as revolt or invasion, may have triggered or intensified them. Whatever the combination of events, San Lorenzo, Mesoamerica's first city, faded from prominence during the 10th century BC, paving the way for La Venta to rise as the new dominant center to the east. La Venta remains one of ancient America's greatest enigmas. How could a city of such influence and sophistication rise to prominence in the middle of a vast wetland? Why did its rulers import enormous quantities of basalt, serpentine, and jadeite into a floodplain where none of these materials naturally occurred? And how did it manage to become, and remain for centuries, the most advanced society in Mexico and Central America during the Middle Formative Period? These questions continue to drive research, though much still remains unknown. The site itself occupies a ridge overlooking the ancient channel of the Palma River, only 15 kilometers from the Gulf of Mexico. It sat within a rich ecological setting of waterways, elevated ridges, and oxbow lakes that provided both natural transport routes and fertile farmland along the river levees, not to mention an abundance of fish and other aquatic resources. Humans had been taking advantage of this environment for more than 7,000 years, as shown by early farmers at nearby San Andres. The earliest direct evidence of occupation at Venta dates to around 1200 BC, though earlier traces are almost certainly still buried. Whatever its local significance during the late 2nd millennium BC, by 900 BC, Venta had become the dominant Olmec capital, and it retained that role for nearly 4 centuries. Much of what we know about Venta comes from excavations at Complex A, a ceremonial precinct of plazas and mounds located just north of the massive Great Pyramid. Work carried out in 1955 identified 4 major construction phases dated between 1000 and 600 BC using radiocarbon analysis. Without a detailed ceramic sequence from the main site, it is difficult to trace historical developments precisely, but ceramic sequences at nearby San Andres likely reflect those at Venta itself. Charcoal from the outer layers of the Great Pyramid dated to about 394 BC, suggesting the city, and likely the pyramid, was abandoned soon after 400 BC. Afterward, squatters briefly occupied the ruins, and a small late Classic community settled on the site's northern edge centuries later. Still, the monumental pyramid remained a landmark, inspiring stories among travelers who encountered its silent mounds and scattered sculptures deep in the jungle. Because Venta saw little occupation after its abandonment, its monuments and buried offerings remained relatively undisturbed, allowing archaeologists to study them in their original settings. This preservation has provided valuable insights into the city's organization and function. At its height, Venta's urban zone may have covered up to 200 hectares, much of it devoted to elite and ceremonial purposes. Rebecca Gonzalez-Lauch's detailed mapping revealed a carefully designed layout. The core was aligned along a north-south axis, oriented 8 degrees west of magnetic north, dividing the city into mirrored eastern and western halves. At its center rose the Great Pyramid, archaeologists' Complex C, flanked by mounds and courtyards to the north and south that formed interconnected architectural units. Like San Lorenzo before it, Venta was a regal ritual city, a community where ritual and ideology structured civic life. F. Kent Riley III has argued that its mound complexes represented a three-dimensional cosmic model, serving as the stage for ceremonies that reenacted creation and renewed the world. Gonzalez-Lauch's mapping showed that Venta was not just a loose cluster of mounds, but a carefully orchestrated environment. 9 architectural complexes composed of 40 earth mounds, 90 known stone monuments, dozens of formal entrances, and numerous caches of buried offerings. While the mounds likely supported structures, further excavation is needed to confirm this. Though the city's elite and ceremonial focus is undeniable, it is important to remember that Venta was not only home to rulers and priests. Farmers, artisans, and commoners also lived in and around the city, though their homes, constructed of perishable materials directly on the ground, left little trace on the surface. Most Olmecs continued to live in small villages and hamlets along the nearby levees, producing food and goods that sustained the capital. Venta was the ceremonial and ideological heart of the realm, but it depended on the labor and resources of its wider hinterland. At Venta, the outer edges of the city were marked by 2 major architectural zones, Complex D to the south and Complex 1 to the north. Each appears to have functioned as a formal entryway, signaled by 3 carefully placed stone monuments. Complex D, with its 20 mounds divided by long plazas or avenues, may have been a royal residential district, according to David Grove, though others see Complex B as more suitable for that role. Archaeologists generally assume the mounds supported houses or other structures, but excavation will be needed to confirm their use. It is possible that many instead functioned as ritual stages or viewing platforms, with ceremonies enacted before audiences gathered in the plazas below. 2 mounds, D11 and D12, even appear to form a ball court just south of the Stirling Acropolis. Excavation of D7, a small mound near the complex's southern edge, uncovered a U-shaped building around a sunken patio, once topped by 3 sandstone sculptures of squatting figures holding helmets. Gonzalez suggests this mound may have served as a formal gateway for visitors entering the city from the south. Complex Twaun, at the northern boundary, may have performed a similar role, though most of its mounds were destroyed when an airstrip was built. 2 groups of sculptures may represent the remnants of its formal entrance. The first group, monuments 19, 20, and 21, may have stood on the site's center line. Monument 19, a masterpiece of low relief, shows a man holding a bag nestled within the body of a rattlesnake, its head crowned with feathers, making it the earliest known depiction of a feathered serpent in Mesoamerica. Monument 20 seems to portray a stylized whale or manatee, while Monument 21 depicts a mutilated, headless figure seated behind a rectangular block. The second sculptural grouping consists of 3 colossal heads arranged in an east-west line. Grove interpreted these as symbols of Venta's sacred rulership embodied in divine kings. Later, Afrocentric writers, such as Ivan van Sertima, incorrectly claimed that Matthew Stirling found them facing east toward Africa, but in reality, Stirling noted that all 3 looked north. At the core of Venta lay its royal compound, formed by 4 large complexes, A, B, C, and the Stirling Acropolis. Together, they housed the ruler's residence and the main settings for both public and private rituals that connected the leadership to the supernatural. While the boundaries of the compound are not clearly defined, it is likely that most Olmecs viewed the entire urban core as sacred space, though these 4 complexes represented its ceremonial heart. Complex C, the Great Pyramid, dominated the city's landscape then as it does today. Rising more than 30 meters high and measuring 128 meters north-south by 114 meters east-west, it contained an estimated 99,100 cubic meters of earthfill, making it unmatched in scale and sophistication anywhere in Mesoamerica at the time. An apron of earth surrounded its south, east, and west sides, with a ramp leading down to Plaza B. For many years, archaeologists assumed the pyramid was rectangular, like later Mesoamerican structures. However, detailed mapping by Robert Heiser's team in 1967 revealed it to be round-based with fluted ridges, resembling an inverted cupcake mold. Was this its intended form, or the result of millennia of erosion? Heiser believed it was deliberately shaped to echo a Tuxtla volcano. Excavations by Gonzalez later suggested instead that it was a stepped pyramidal form with inset corners, reflecting a sophisticated architectural tradition. A magnetometer survey detected a strong anomaly on the pyramid's southern slope, perhaps indicating burned clay, but possibly also a hidden cache of monuments, or even the tomb of an Olmec ruler. The apron and surrounding smaller mounds may have served as ritual stages or shrine platforms, while the entire setting was enhanced by carved stone monuments. 6 stelae were firmly embedded in the apron floor, arranged in 2 groups of 3, each facing Plaza B. 2 massive thrones also flanked the ramp. Some monuments depict mythological beings, including Karl Taub's Olmec maze god, while Stela 5 portrays 3 standing figures overseen by a 4th above them, perhaps representing rulers attended by ancestors or divine patrons. Taken together, these complexes suggest that the Great Pyramid and its surrounding monuments were not only the symbolic centerpiece of La Venta, but also a carefully orchestrated stage for rituals that reaffirmed the authority of the city's rulers and their connection to both history and the divine. At La Venta, 2 imposing flat-topped monoliths, known as Altars 2 and 3, stood on the ramp in front of the Great Pyramid's apron. Both depict seated adults emerging from niches, though only the figure on Altar 2 holds a baby in his hands. These carvings probably functioned as thrones where rulers sat during ceremonies. The symbolic contrast between the baby's presence on one and its absence on the other is still debated, but together the monuments, framed by the massive pyramid behind, would have created a powerful tableau of rulership, fertility, and cosmic order. F. Kent Riley III has argued that the pyramid itself symbolized the mountain of creation, while the monuments referenced water, maize, fertility, and authority, the essential elements of Olmec existence. Although many details remain elusive, systematic excavation could reveal more about the complex symbolic program of this monumental stage. South of the pyramid lies Complex B, centered on Plaza B and its small altar-like platform, Mound B-4. The plaza, covering over 42,000 square meters, could have held thousands of people for rituals conducted on the pyramid or its apron. Sculptures arranged in and around the plaza included a colossal head, 3 thrones, Stela 2, and a basalt column. Additional fragments of monuments found near Mound B-4 seem to be in or near their original positions, reinforcing the idea that Plaza B was a place where divine rulership was publicly displayed. Overlooking the plaza to the east is the Sterling Acropolis, a massive platform measuring 324 by 260 meters and rising 7 meters high. On its summit were circular and parallel mounds, possibly one of Mesoamerica's earliest ball courts. Excavations revealed basalt columns, several stone-lined drains, and a cache of broken monuments, evidence that the Acropolis likely served as the royal residence and palace where the ruler and his household lived and governed. Immediately north of the pyramid is one of the most distinctive complexes in Olmec architecture. Complex A. Enclosed by a fence of stone columns, this secluded precinct was both a sacred sanctuary and a replica of the Olmec cosmos in 3 dimensions. Within its courts and mounds, rulers and priests carried out rituals linking the living with deceased and deified ancestors. Complex A consisted of 2 main courts: the South Court, a passageway leading to the more private North or enclosed court. Both courts reflected La Venta's strict bilateral symmetry, mirroring the city's north-south axis in both surface and subterranean elements. The symmetry may even have extended to nearby complexes east and west of the precinct. Complex A went through 4 major construction phases. In Phase 1, builders leveled the terrain, marked the orientation line, and surrounded the area with a red clay embankment, later topped with sand floors and 3 platform mounds. Phase 2 introduced adobe walls, additional sand floors, and the first massive offerings, including pavements of green serpentine blocks and caches of jadeite axes. During Phase 3, the enclosed court was covered with layers of colored clays and sands into which further offerings were buried. Among these was Offering 10, a cruciform arrangement of 38 jaded and serpentine celts, almost certainly representing a cosmological message tied to the four directions. Phase 4 marked the height of the complex. 11 low red clay mounds were constructed, enclosed by stone column palisades for privacy. Mound A2 became a burial mound containing elite tombs, while the entire court transformed into a ritual landscape that embodied the Olmec universe: underworld, earthly realm, and heavens. The offerings of Phase 4 were especially elaborate. Builders dug a deep pit lined with serpentine blocks, massive Offering 2, then refilled it with soil containing caches of jadeite and serpentine celts. One arrangement of 37 axes formed a cruciform pattern on the site's central axis, while others contained 9 celts arranged in rows with iron ore mirrors and traces of cinnabar. Above these offerings, Tomb B, a sandstone sarcophagus carved with the Olmec dragon, was placed. Nearby, Tomb A was constructed from basalt columns, identical to those used in the surrounding palisade. Together with other offerings, sculptures, and caches, these elements created a sacred space where Venta's rulers could both honor their ancestors and proclaim their divine right to rule. It is doubtful that the Olmecs who began Phase 1 of Complex A envisioned exactly how the sanctuary would look in Phase 4, especially if the building sequence truly spanned 4 centuries, as some archaeologists believe. More likely, the construction unfolded over a shorter period, perhaps a century or so, with an overarching plan in mind, later reshaped by a final ruler who imposed a more ambitious vision, resulting in the layout we see in Phase 4. The complex remained active for generations until Venta itself was abandoned around 400 BC. Yet the Olmecs did not simply abandon the sacred space to decay. Their last act was a ceremonial closure, sealing the precinct under a 30-centimeter layer of red clay, cutting it off from the living world until modern excavations exposed it again in the 20th century. During Phase 4, at least a dozen carved monuments formed part of the precinct's design. Many are fragmentary, but 4 stand out. Stela 1 depicts a standing woman, one of the rare certain representations of a female in Olmec art. Stela 3, an irregular basalt shaft, bears a crowded low-relief scene that appears to record either a myth or a historical episode, with 2 elaborately dressed men confronting each other while smaller, perhaps supernatural beings surround them. Monument 5 portrays a plump, baby-faced figure with a crest-like hairstyle holding a bowl, possibly a dwarf or were-jaguar infant, though local tradition insists on identifying it as La Abuelita, a grandmother offering tortillas. Monument 13, known as the Ambassador, shows a walking man carrying a banner with 4 surrounding symbols, including a footprint glyph, likely the earliest known representation of travel in Mesoamerican writing. 5 tombs were also constructed during this phase, reinforcing the idea that Complex A was fundamentally a mortuary precinct dedicated to ancestral rulers. Tombs A, B, and E were aligned under Mound A-2 on the site's central axis, while tombs C and D lay beneath Mound A-3. These are among the earliest formal tombs in Mesoamerica, and though all skeletal remains had dissolved in the acidic soil, the rich grave goods and elaborate architecture confirm that they belonged to Venta's ruling elite. Tomb A was built with walls and roofing of basalt columns, its floor paved with limestone slabs coated in dark clay. Stains of red cinnabar, along with traces of bone and teeth, suggest 2 young individuals were buried there. Each was accompanied by extraordinary jadeite ornaments, including figurines, pendants, beads, a stingray spine bloodletter, and a polished magnetite mirror. After burial, the chamber was filled with reddish clay and the mound raised above. Tomb B, just south of Tomb A, was a carefully carved sandstone sarcophagus decorated with the Olmec word jaguar motif. Inside were a serpentine figurine, jadeite ear spools paired with jaguar tooth pendants, and a jadeite bloodletter. Whether this sarcophagus once held a body that later disintegrated, or if it was a symbolic pseudo-burial, remains uncertain, especially since the sarcophagus itself has since been lost or destroyed. Between the two lay Tomb E, capped with basalt columns over a deposit of cinnabar and clay containing 108 jadeite celts and ornaments. Among them was a greenstone celt, incised with a were-jaguar image highlighted in red hematite. Tomb C, under Mound A-3, was a sandstone cyst filled with cinnabar and an array of offerings, including pottery, obsidian, crystal fragments, and more than 30 greenstone objects such as ear spools, pendants, beads, and figurines. This assemblage may represent the last major deposit of jadeite wealth by La Venta's rulers. Tomb D, slightly offset from the main axis, lacked a built structure and may have been a child's burial. A thin layer of cinnabar and jadeite ornaments positioned as though adorning a head, along with beads and a pottery vessel, marked the grave. Together, these tombs, offerings, and monuments underscore the role of Complex A as a sacred space where the living elite of La Venta reinforced their authority by maintaining an intimate link with their deified ancestors. Within Complex A at La Venta, archaeologists uncovered an extraordinary range of caches that were not tied directly to burials. These offerings fall into three categories: massive offerings, pavements, or mosaic masks, and small dedicatory offerings. The massive offerings were created by digging huge pits into the ground, filling them with tons of serpentine blocks packed into special clays. 5 such offerings have been identified. A typical example, Massive Offering 1, was a square pit measuring over 23 meters per side. Into it, the builders placed 28 carefully stacked layers of serpentine blocks, over 1,000 tons in total, surrounded by olive and blue clays. On top, they laid Pavement 3, a mosaic of 485 green serpentine blocks set in yellowish clay. Measuring nearly 5 meters across, the design is abstract and enigmatic, with most scholars suggesting it represents a highly stylized Olmec word jaguar. Above it, a fill of mottled pink clay held a cruciform cache of jadeite and serpentine celts, along with a small iron ore mirror echoing similar patterned caches found elsewhere in the precinct. One of the most striking deposits, Small Dedicatory Offering 4, was discovered west of Mound A-1F. 16 small figurines and 6 celts were arranged in what looks like a staged ritual scene. 11 figurines stand in a semicircle, watching 4 others walk single file toward a central figure carved from polished jadeite. The celts were placed upright behind them, resembling the stone column fences that once enclosed the precinct. Most figurines are serpentine, though one is basalt, and all show heavy wear, suggesting they were treasured heirlooms before being ritually interred. Later, someone reopened the floor above them just enough to expose their heads, perhaps to confirm their presence, before carefully covering them again. The scale of La Venta's deposits is staggering. More than 250 jadeite and serpentine celts have been scientifically excavated here, many arranged in rectangular or cruciform patterns, while countless others may have been looted. Most are plain and highly polished, but a few bear incised images of supernatural beings. Considering that the Jadiate came from Guatemala's Sierra de las Minas, over 480 kilometers away, the sheer effort required to transport it speaks volumes about its symbolic and spiritual value. La Venta was also a major center for monumental stone carving, rivaled only by San Lorenzo. 90 monuments have been documented, with more continuing to appear. Like San Lorenzo, La Venta had colossal heads, thrones, drain systems, and other dynastic symbols. Yet the two centers differ stylistically. La Venta artists often produced flatter, low-relief carvings, while San Lorenzo favored fully three-dimensional forms. Whether this reflects differences in stone resources or cultural preferences, both traditions reveal the central role of rulers and their ties to the supernatural. The meaning behind La Venta's monuments and mounds has long puzzled archaeologists, but two breakthroughs have opened new lines of thought: the publication of a detailed site map and the decipherment of Maya hieroglyphs, which show how Mesoamerican art encoded cosmic and creation myths. When compared with the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation story, Olmec imagery appears to share the same fundamental cosmological themes. Scholars such as F. Kent Riley argue that La Venta was intentionally built as a sacred landscape, a portal linking humans to divine forces. Building on this, David Grove studied the distribution of monuments, suggesting that their placement was deliberate. He found that the north sector, with Complex A and its tombs, was dedicated to the ancestors, while the south, including Plaza B and most monuments, was the realm of living rulers and public ritual. The Great Pyramid stood between them, a symbolic sacred mountain bridging past and present. Riley, meanwhile, interprets the northern sector as a cosmological model, with buried massive offerings symbolizing the primordial ocean and mosaic pavements, representing the Olmec dragon, lord of fertility and agriculture. Tomb B within Mound A2, with its sarcophagus and offerings, represented the eternal resting place of a king who continued to participate in cycles of creation and renewal. Seen in this light, La Venta's vast construction projects were not about practicality, but about belief. The city was designed to mirror the cosmos, allowing Olmec rulers, seen as shaman kings, to act as mediators between their people and the divine. Even in death, they remained active guardians of the community, their resting places serving as portals where successors could call on their power. For the common people, La Venta was not just a ceremonial capital, but also home, a place where families lived and worked under the shadow of monumental mounds and sacred sculptures. Future research will need to uncover more about these ordinary citizens who made up the fabric of Olmec life. The territory under La Venta's influence was never static. Its extent shifted as the city's fortunes rose and fell, and as outlying communities alternately aligned with or distanced themselves from the center. Archaeological surveys in the wetlands east of La Venta have uncovered hundreds of sites, many of them buried beneath layers of alluvium. From the top of the Great Pyramid in its prime, one would have looked out across a landscape dotted with the pale roofs of houses, fields of maize, fallow plots, and patches of dense forest. Research by William F. Rust identified a clear three-tiered hierarchy in this region. At the summit stood La Venta itself, followed by large villages marked by central mounds, and finally the small hamlets and house clusters without monumental features. Of these smaller sites, only San Andrés and Isla Alor have been properly excavated. At San Andrés, archaeologists found offerings of incised pottery, figurines of ball players, helmeted males and slender female figures, along with polished greenstone ornaments and celts. The diet of its inhabitants included maize, fish, turtles, deer, crocodiles, and dogs. More recent excavations there have pushed the record back into pre-Olmec times and even uncovered evidence of true Olmec writing, making it a key site for understanding the middle levels of Olmec society. Isla Alor, situated on an ancient levee between La Venta and the sea, revealed traces of ordinary households: clay floors, hearths, post holes, broken pottery, figurines, spindle whorls, and tools. Obsidian debris shows that tool-making occurred on-site, while charred wood, maize remains, and fish bones provide glimpses of everyday life. These modest finds give voice to the countless ordinary Olmecs who formed the backbone of the civilization. La Venta did not exist in isolation. Any reconstruction of its power must take into account rival centers elsewhere in Olmen. During the Middle Formative period, San Lorenzo had already waned, and Laguna de los Cerros presents dating problems, suggesting both may have been subordinate to La Venta for a time. La Encrucijada, 40 kilómetros al este, parece haber sido o bien un centro secundario o incluso una política independiente. A greenstone pectoral carved with an Olmec or jaguar face, reportedly found there, hints at its ritual significance. Another extraordinary discovery occurred in 1969 at Rio Pesquero, where fishermen stumbled upon an immense underwater cache of jadeite masks, celts, figurines, and ornaments, objects strongly resembling La Venta's ritual deposits. Sadly, most of this treasure was smuggled abroad, and without proper excavation, the site's true nature remains uncertain. It may have been a settlement or a water shrine akin to El Manatí. The summit of San Martin Pajapan volcano offered yet another sacred landscape. There, the Olmecs placed a life-sized sculpture of a kneeling man, wearing a feathered headdress and holding a bar, his pose tense and dynamic. Many scholars interpret him as raising the world tree, the cosmic axis at the heart of Mesoamerican belief. Transporting such a work up the mountain was a monumental feat. Later, peoples continued to venerate the statue, leaving offerings across centuries. Today, it stands in the museum at Jalapa, though the mountaintop itself may still conceal further remains. By 400 BC, however, Olmec civilization had reached its end. La Venta and San Lorenzo, along with much of the riverine lowlands, were abandoned. The distinctive sculptures, jade objects, and pottery ceased to be produced, and the trade networks that once linked Olmen to distant regions fell apart. Yet people did not vanish from the broader landscape. A successor culture, often called Epi-Olmec, arose at Tres Zapotes, carrying forward some traditions in new forms. Why did the Olmecs collapse? The decline can be narrowed to the 5th and 4th centuries BC, coinciding with La Venta's final construction phase and its abandonment soon after 400 BC. San Lorenzo's hinterland was deserted at the same time. For centuries afterward, the lower Coatzacoalcos basin lay empty of substantial populations. Environmental change appears to have been decisive. Geomorphological studies reveal that river channels around San Lorenzo and La Venta shifted dramatically during these centuries, undermining both commerce and agriculture. Tectonic movement, sea level changes, erosion from farming, and volcanic ashfalls all contributed to this instability. While social unrest, dynastic struggles, and weakened trade networks may have added pressure, the complete depopulation of the eastern lowlands suggests that environmental upheaval made the land unsustainable for farming communities. Where the Olmec people went remains uncertain. Some may have migrated to western Olmen or beyond, but the evidence is thin. What is clear is that the Olmec heartland, once the cradle of Mesoamerica's first great civilization, was left empty for nearly 1,000 years. Our fascination with Olmec monuments, jade, and other elite symbols often overshadows the reality that the majority of Olmecs were ordinary villagers. They lived and died in the small communities where they were born. Their daily routines centered on farming, fishing, and household tasks carried out within close-knit groups of family and neighbors. They were truly people of the river, building their lives alongside waterways, swamps, and oxbow lakes that provided fertile farmland, aquatic food, and natural transportation routes. As rivers shifted their courses over time, so too did the settlements that depended on them. For a long while, archaeologists paid little attention to these villagers, but recent excavations at San Andres, Isla Alor, San Lorenzo, and other sites are now giving us valuable glimpses into the everyday world of America's earliest civilization. There was likely no single, typical Olmec village, but many must have shared common features. Villages were usually clusters of house compounds scattered across slightly raised ground to avoid seasonal floods. Larger communities might include a low mound that supported the dwelling of a leading family, or perhaps a small temple devoted to a patron deity or an honored ancestor, while smaller hamlets had no such monuments, reflecting a more equal social structure. A typical house lot consisted of a main building, simple lean-to shelters, a courtyard, a small garden, and a boundary marked by fences or rows of living plants. The main house doubled as sleeping quarters, dining area, and shelter from storms, while most daily tasks, cooking, craft work, and child rearing, took place under the lean-tos, protected from the harsh tropical sun. Courtyards were little more than hardened earth worn smooth by constant use, and gardens were carefully tended with vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants, often enriched by discarded refuse or fertilized by waste. Beyond the gardens lay larger plots for staple crops like maize. Dense stands of trees around the houses provided not only shade, but also fruits and nuts such as avocados, cacao, and palm. The village landscape was likely dotted with fishing nets, farming implements, and traps, always close at hand. If we were suddenly transported into one of these villages, we might see women grinding corn, children playing or pestering animals, pet monkeys tied to branches, families gathered for curing rituals, and mothers soothing infants, all the small but telling details of everyday life that archaeology rarely captures. Though some of this reconstruction comes from ethnographic comparison with modern villages, excavations have confirmed many aspects. At San Andres, for example, archaeologists uncovered compacted earth floors, post holes, traces of mud daub walls, hearths, underground storage pits, burials, and middens filled with broken pottery, figurines, utensils, and food remains. The houses had pole and thatch construction, some square and others with rounded corners, occasionally built on low mounds. Inside, hearths sat on earthen floors, and furniture was simple: benches, mats, baskets, net bags, and wooden containers. Many households included small shrines or altars dedicated to ancestors. Storage pits dug beneath or beside houses held food in baskets or ceramic vessels. When they collapsed or soured, they were filled with refuse to prevent accidents. One pit contained lime powder, used for preparing nixtamal, a special maize dough that became a foundation of the Olmec diet. Housing size and quality reflected social rank. Wealthier families lived in larger structures, often built on raised platforms near temples and palaces, and their households contained ceremonial vessels, figurines, and precious greenstone. The most elaborate known residence is the so-called Red Palace at San Lorenzo, which stood on a raised platform and featured L-shaped basalt steps, red gravel-coated floors, walls finished with dressed surfaces, and even a 4-meter-tall basalt column supporting the roof. A sophisticated drainage system of basalt troughs wound its way beneath the building. Such residences show the stark divide between rulers and commoners, illustrating how deeply stratified Olmec society had already become. Most Olmecs, like many ancient peoples, enjoyed diets that were often richer and more balanced than those of many of their modern descendants. Both archaeological evidence and historical linguistics help reconstruct this picture. Linguists Lyle Campbell and Terence Kaufman argued that the Olmecs likely spoke Proto-Mixozoquean, the ancestral language of several modern tongues in the region, and from this they reconstructed a vocabulary that includes key food terms, words for maize, cacao, squash, beans, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, manioc, cotton, and tropical fruits such as papaya, guava, zapote, and chayote all appear, providing a kind of prehistoric grocery list. Archaeological finds confirm much of this linguistic reconstruction. Excavations at San Andres uncovered remains of maize, manioc, beans, cacao, cotton, sunflower, and corozo palm nuts. Middens there also contained evidence of swamp and river harvests, including clams, turtles, catfish, crocodiles, and deer, along with bones of domestic dogs, which were clearly an important protein source. San Lorenzo has yielded similar evidence, including a notable number of dog bones, showing that dog meat was a common staple. Although the Olmec diet was varied, maize emerged as the true foundation of daily subsistence. Originally domesticated in the Balsas River Valley of Guerrero during the Archaic period, maize pollen appears in soil samples from San Andres as early as 6,200 BC, with improved strains showing up only a few centuries later. By 2500 BC, kernels and cobs are already present in the record. Early maize was relatively small and low-yielding, but over time it became a dependable and abundant crop. Its versatility made it invaluable. Maize could be eaten fresh or dried, ground into flour, fermented into beer, or stored for long periods, an essential advantage in humid lowland climates where most foods spoiled quickly. Scholars suggest it may have first become popular as a festival and beer food before becoming the daily staple it later became. The critical transformation of maize into a truly life-sustaining crop depended on the discovery of nixtamalization, the process of soaking kernels in lime or ash before grinding them into dough. This method dramatically increased maize's nutritional value by enhancing protein content and preventing dietary deficiencies. Archaeological hints, such as lime residues inside jars, suggest that Olmec cooks may already have known this technique. Linguistic evidence may also support this, as Proto-Mixozoquean appears to have contained terms related to grinding and soaking maize. By 1500 BC, maize had become so central that it was deified and symbolized in Olmec religion. Not all foods were equally available to everyone. Some delicacies, like cacao and certain meats, may have been reserved for elites. Excavations at Rayobari villages with central mounds uncovered deer, crocodile, and dog bones, animals absent in smaller hamlets. This suggests that elites either restricted access to these foods or distributed them during feasts and ceremonies. Their hides were also used for elite clothing and ritual regalia. It is possible that all villagers ate such foods occasionally, but portions may have been required as tribute to local leaders. Farming practices remain imperfectly understood, but Olmec agriculture likely involved swidden, or slash and burn methods. Farmers felled forest with stone axes, burned the dried vegetation, and planted maize and other crops in the ash with digging sticks. River levees were favored because annual floods renewed the soil, while swampy ground may have been modified with raised planting beds. Clearing land was labor-intensive. Though cutting mature forest with stone axes was manageable, secondary brush without metal tools was extremely difficult to remove. This made fertile levees even more attractive for farming, while less fertile interfluvial areas were probably used more sparingly, often as sources of game and forest products. Archaeologists working near Lake Catemaco uncovered a middle formative maize field preserved by volcanic ash, with furrows and ridges that reveal the practice of mounding earth around maize stalks, a technique that must have been widely used by Olmec farmers to ensure strong crops. The Olmecs inherited a long tradition of adapting to the humid tropics, but they advanced this heritage by creating new tools, techniques, and systems of organizing labor. Their technology drew on clay, stone, bone, deer antler, wood, basketry, and other perishable materials. Though only clay and stone objects have survived in large numbers, pottery became a particularly refined craft, likely carried out by women who turned local clay into vessels, figurines, and ritual items. Because pottery is fragile yet easily replaced, Olmec sites contain millions of broken sherds, which now provide archaeologists with key evidence for dating sites and reconstructing daily life. The earliest cooking and eating wares with brushed surfaces may go back as far as 2300 BC at San Andres, but the richest ceramic record comes from San Lorenzo. Here potters created both everyday and ceremonial vessels. Common forms included flat-bottomed bowls, hemispherical bowls, necked bottles, jars, and gourd-like techomates. Basic cooking pots, such as the Kamano courseware, had tan to brown surfaces, coarse temper, and roughened exteriors, while other jars and bottles stored liquids and food. Decorative techniques included surface modeling, paint, incision, excision, and punctation, with the finest examples reserved for ritual use. Two especially notable types, calzadas carved and liman carved incised, featured thin, elegant bowls and jars with deeply cut and incised Olmec symbols. Figurines were also widespread, ranging from small, solid human effigies, often ambiguous in gender, to representations of ball players in helmets and protective gear, pregnant women, and chubby baby face figures with slit eyes and downturned mouths. Larger hollow figurines, usually slipped with white paint, were rarer and of higher quality, likely serving ritual purposes. Stone tools were equally vital. Every household had basalt manos and metates for grinding maize, along with mortars, pestles, celts, hammerstones, polishers, saws, and pallets. Obsidian, chert, and flint were chipped into blades, projectile points, scrapers, and drills. Since obsidian was not local, it had to be imported, primarily from sources in Puebla, Estado de Mexico, and El Chayal in Guatemala, arriving as raw blocks or cores for finishing at San Lorenzo. Although the Olmecs lived in a Stone Age world, they worked iron ores, magnetite, hematite, and ilmenite, into beads, ornaments, and mirrors. At San Lorenzo, workshops uncovered by Anne Cyphers contained tons of small rectangular ilmenite beads drilled with conical holes. These may have been strung as adornments or used for another purpose, possibly even as a form of currency. Colossal Head 17, for example, shows a netted headdress that may have been decorated with such pieces. The most remarkable Olmec iron ore works were their mirrors. Large concave pieces of magnetite and ilmenite were polished with such precision that they rivaled modern optical lenses. Some could focus sunlight to ignite fires or project images onto flat surfaces. Suspension holes show they were worn on the chest, as depicted on Olmec figurines. 7 examples were found in Venta's Complex A, with others uncovered at San Lorenzo, Rio Pesquero, and Guerrero. Olmec artisans also made mosaic mirrors from smaller plaques, possibly mounted on wooden frames. Evidence from San Jose Mogote in Oaxaca suggests that its workshops may have produced some of the plaques found at San Lorenzo, though whether they also crafted the large single-piece mirrors remains uncertain. The social and political organization of the Olmecs has long been one of the most debated subjects in Mesoamerican archaeology, and even with the wealth of new discoveries, no clear consensus has been reached. Everyone agrees that kinship lay at the heart of Olmec society, but the exact details, such as household arrangements, extended family ties, and the nature of connections between neighboring villages, remain uncertain. At the center of the debate is the issue of authority. How much power did leaders possess, and who exactly wielded it? Some scholars argue that Olmec society was structured into lineages, groups that traced descent to a shared ancestor, real or mythical. Within this system, each individual's rank depended on their genealogical proximity to the founder, with the head of the lineage, male or female, serving as chief. Lineages themselves were also ranked, with the most prestigious forming a kind of nobility, headed by the paramount chief who presided over the larger society. Societies built on such principles are known as chiefdoms. They are well documented in many parts of the world, including Polynesia, Sub-Saharan Africa, lowland South America, and the Pacific Northwest coast of North America. Chiefdoms typically represent an intermediate stage of social complexity, more developed than egalitarian farming communities, yet lacking the institutionalized bureaucracies, defined social classes, and military structures characteristic of true states. In many world regions, chiefdoms provided the foundations from which states eventually developed. The question is whether the same path was followed in Mesoamerica. Some scholars reject the chiefdom model, claiming the Olmecs were already a state-level society, citing evidence such as large populations, the immense labor required to build monuments and public works, and the existence of long-distance trade. I once favored the chiefdom interpretation, but evidence for Olmec urbanism has caused me to reconsider. Whether we ultimately classify them as a chiefdom or an early state, it is clear that Olmec society was highly stratified, a fact visible in their settlement hierarchy, craft specialization, monumental art, ritual practices, and elite burials. In later Mesoamerican civilizations, writing, calendrics, and astronomy were essential tools of elite culture. We now know that writing and calendar systems can be traced back at least to 650 BC at Venta, though evidence for Olmec astronomy remains uncertain. Later, Mesoamerican scribes recorded history and ritual in hieroglyphs on codices, stone, ceramics, and other media, using calendars that structured their view of time. The most important were the 260-day ritual cycle, the 365-day solar year, the combined calendar round of 52 years, and the long count, a linear reckoning that the Maya traced back to August 13th, 3114 BC. Once thought to be a Maya creation, the long count is now known to have been in use in Veracruz, Chiapas, and Guatemala centuries earlier, and some suggest it may have been invented by the Olmecs themselves. For a long time, scholars assumed the Olmecs lacked true writing, citing only symbolic shorthand, like the paw and wing motif for the Olmec dragon deity that appeared on pottery, sculpture, and body decoration. Such symbols conveyed meaning but did not represent spoken words. That changed in 2002 when excavations at San Andres near La Venta uncovered a roller stamp and fragments of a greenstone plaque dated to around 650 BC. The stamp shows a bird with speech scrolls issuing glyph-like symbols, while the greenstone pieces preserve several clear glyphs. Comparative studies suggest one corresponds to 3 Ajah, a day name in the later Maya 260-day calendar, a term that also meant king. This strongly hints at an early writing system linked to rulership. Other stamps and artifacts from La Venta and Tlatilco may represent similar evidence, though earlier scholars dismissed them. What is now clear is that this early script formed a bridge to later Isthmian and Maya writing systems. Olmec achievements in astronomy are more elusive. La Venta's orientation, 8 degrees west of north, may reflect alignment with celestial bodies such as the constellation Eta Draconis, though some argue it corresponds instead to volcanoes in the Tuxtla Range or other terrestrial landmarks. Either way, the alignment shows that Olmec builders were already embedding cosmological or symbolic meaning into their city planning. Religion was the unifying force of Olmec society, providing coherence for its members and a shared system of expression that modern scholars can still recognize. At its core, Olmec religion seems to have rested on 5 main elements: a pantheon of deities and supernatural powers who controlled the universe and validated human authority, a cosmology that explained the origins and structure of the world, rituals that expressed and reinforced this worldview, priests and shamans who carried out these rituals, and sacred spaces, both natural and constructed, where religious life unfolded. This public religion bound the larger society together, but it coexisted with smaller, localized practices that took place within household compounds and kin groups. Most of what we know about Olmec religion remains speculative, since archaeology provides fragments rather than complete narratives. To make sense of these fragments, scholars rely on 3 sources: careful study of Olmec art and artifacts, early Spanish descriptions of Aztec and Maya religions, and ethnographic research among modern Mesoamerican and Native American communities. These 3 strands form the basis of what Peter D. Geralaman called the continuity hypothesis. According to this idea, all Mesoamerican peoples shared a common religious system that began long before the Olmecs and survived long after the Spanish conquest. Olmec art, under this framework, represents the earliest monumental expression of beliefs that continued to resonate throughout later Mesoamerican cultures. Miguel Covarrubias was one of the first to apply this approach to the Olmecs, showing how later Mesoamerican rain gods could all be traced back to an Olmec prototype. More recent research supports this, particularly by linking Olmec imagery to the Popol Vuh, the great Quiche's Maya creation story. This myth recounts the struggles of the maize gods and their sons, the hero twins, against the lords of the underworld. Though defeated at first, the twins eventually triumph, resurrect their fathers, and establish the present cycle of existence. Scholars such as F. Kent Riley, Carl Taub, and Linda Shealy have identified elements of this narrative in Olmec art, suggesting that the Olmecs may have been the first to visually express a version of this cosmic drama. In this sense, Geralaman's continuity hypothesis finds strong confirmation. Still, caution is necessary. Religious symbols often change their meaning across time and space, and we cannot assume that the Aztec religion, the best documented Mesoamerican system, was directly analogous to the much earlier Olmec tradition. The Aztec world of millions was vastly more complex socially and politically, which may have produced different kinds of religious institutions. Even so, careful comparisons grounded in the continuity hypothesis remain our best means of reconstructing Olmec religion. Although we lack written texts from the Olmecs, scholars see them as part of a broader Mesoamerican cosmology, in which the world was created and destroyed multiple times, with the present being only the latest in a series. Joralemon highlights 3 strands that shaped Olmec belief: ancient shamanic traditions brought by early inhabitants of the Americas, fertility and agricultural cults that grew with the adoption of farming, and an Olmec innovation he termed the cult of the ruler. Together, these strands gave the Olmecs a cosmological framework that connected the natural and supernatural worlds while defining the role of human leaders within them. The Olmec worldview was shaped by a shamanic ideology that divided the universe into 3 realms: sky, earth, and underworld, anchored by the 4 cardinal directions and balanced on a central axis mundi. Each direction was likely associated with its own colors, sacred trees, birds, and divine beings. Shamans, men and women believed to possess extraordinary powers, served as mediators between humans and the supernatural. Through trances induced by fasting or psychotropic substances, they traversed the cosmos with their animal companions, seeking to heal illness, consult ancestors, and placate unseen forces. Alongside this, an agricultural fertility belief system centered on the forces that governed the growth of crops: sun, rain, earth, and spirits tied to agricultural plants. These deities were thought to dwell not only in caves, springs, and mountaintops, but also in fields, shrines, and temples, many of them built close to people's homes. As farming became the foundation of life, these supernatural powers grew in importance, reflecting the dependence of the Olmec on a reliable food supply. By around 1200 BC, the cult of the ruler had emerged, placing leaders at the heart of the cosmic order. Rulers became the primary intermediaries between their people and the gods, a role once reserved largely for shamans. Whether they claimed divine descent, supernatural favor, or even divinity itself, their unique position was constantly reinforced through art and ritual. In this evolving order, rulers were both political leaders and high priests, though shamans continued to function as ritual specialists. The line between shaman and priest was likely blurred, as it was in later Mesoamerican societies. The pantheon itself remains one of the most debated aspects of Olmec religion. Some scholars argue the Olmecs did not worship individualized gods, while others accept their presence but disagree on identities and functions. One famous case is the Olmec dragon, variously interpreted as a jaguar hybrid, a crocodile, a toad, or even a manatee. Disputes also center on which deity was supreme. Was it the jaguar, or perhaps the serpent? Religion scholar Karl Luckert even suggested that what many call a feline figure is in fact a serpent. The confusion is understandable since Olmec art often depicts creatures that are biologically impossible, as Peter Joralemon put it, fusing human, animal, and mythical traits in forms that defy categorization. To bring order to this complexity, Michael Coe, Peter Joralemon, and Carl Taub developed the Los Limus hypothesis. Their work built on the discovery of Los Limus Monument 1, a remarkable greenstone sculpture of a youth cradling a were-jaguar infant. Incised figures on the youth's body appear to represent other supernaturals, providing what scholars see as an Olmec key to the divine world. Joralemon identified 8 principal deities in Olmec iconography, creatures that combine reptilian, avian, feline, and human features. He gave them descriptive rather than proper names. The Olmec dragon, bird monster, fish monster, banded eye god, maze god, water god, were-jaguar, and feathered serpent. Among these, the dragon, bird monster, and fish monster together represented the Olmec cosmos. The dragon, a crocodilian figure often combined with jaguar, eagle, and serpent traits, embodied earth, fire, water, fertility, and elite power. Its distinguishing features included flame-like eyebrows, bulbous nose, bifurcated tongue, and paw-wing motifs on its limbs. It is thought to have foreshadowed later deities such as the Aztec Chipactli, Xiuhtecutli, Huehueteotl, Tonacatecutli, Quetzalcoatl, and the Maya Itzamna. The bird monster, perhaps modeled on a harpy eagle, symbolized the heavens, the sun, and agricultural fertility, and is frequently associated with rulers and shamanic vision quests. It appears prominently at La Venta and in cave murals, ornaments, and jade carvings. The fish monster, representing the watery underworld, is less well known, but is depicted with shark-like teeth, dorsal fins, and a split tail on monuments at San Lorenzo. Other figures added layers to this pantheon. The banded eye god, seen only in profile with its distinctive almond eye, marked by a curved band, remains enigmatic and has been linked, perhaps mistakenly, to later Aztec deities of renewal. The maize god and the water god formed an essential pair embodying agricultural fertility. The maize god is shown with seeds and corn sprouting from the cleft in his head, a direct reflection of maize's centrality to Olmec life and rulership. The water god, often shown as a chubby infant with jaguar traits, underscored the dependence of crops and people alike on life-giving rain. The Olmec water god, often portrayed as an infant with a jaguar-like face, appears on large stone monuments, as well as on portable objects such as celts and figurines. While he is frequently described as a rain deity, his role seems to have encompassed springs, rivers, and all sources of water essential to human survival. Peter Geralaman has argued persuasively that this figure was the earliest form of water gods later known across Mesoamerica, including Tlaloc among the Aztec and Chac among the Maya. Equally iconic, yet far more enigmatic, is the were-jaguar. This supernatural being is typically shown as a human infant with feline features, most notably a cleft at the top of the head, almond-shaped eyes, and a flared upper lip with down-turned corners. Some depictions show the mouth toothless, while others include large split fangs. The origin of the were-jaguar remains uncertain. Matthew Stirling once suggested that Olmec art recorded a mythical union between a human woman and a jaguar male, giving rise to these creatures. Though bold, his Stirling hypothesis remains controversial, as the sculptures he cited are too damaged to confirm such imagery. Still, the mural at Oxtotitlan Cave in Guerrero, showing a jaguar seemingly about to mate with a human, suggests the idea may not be entirely unfounded, even if it cannot be proven to have been central to Olmec cosmology. The feathered serpent represents the last major Olmec deity confidently identified. Typically shown as a rattlesnake with feathers forming a crest on its head, it is considered the earliest version of a figure that would later become one of the most powerful gods in Mesoamerica, such as Quetzalcoatl for the Aztec. Yet in Olmec art, it is rare, suggesting it held only a minor role within their pantheon. More significant were agricultural and fertility deities, reflecting the central role of farming in Olmec life and leaving us with the oldest known representations of these divine concepts in the region. Ritual life played out in both natural and constructed sacred settings. Man-made spaces included plazas, mounds, precincts, ball courts, and elaborate water systems, while springs, caves, and mountaintops served as natural sanctuaries. Although no Olmec temple has been excavated, they were likely built of poles and thatch, housing sacred objects and serving as places where priests and rulers performed private rites. At La Venta, temples were likely built on mound tops, with public audiences gathering in courtyards below. Complex A at La Venta exemplifies a secluded ceremonial precinct, while natural shrines such as the Manatee Springs, San Martin Pajapan volcano, and the caves of Juxtlahuaca and Oxtotitlan highlight the broader sacred landscape. Olmec ritual also included a ball game, a practice that endured in Mesoamerican cultures for centuries. This was not mere sport, but a sacred drama, with players representing deities or culture heroes, enacting cosmic struggles that could end in sacrifice. Figurines depict men in protective gear, and a middle formative ball court has been identified at San Lorenzo. Residues of rubber balls have been found there and at Manatee, confirming the game's early existence. Some once believed the colossal heads portrayed ball players in helmets, though this idea lacks firm evidence. Likewise, aqueducts at San Lorenzo and La Venta were not only practical constructions, but also symbols of sacred water and elite authority, reinforcing the ruler's role as mediators with divine powers tied to fertility and life. Caves, though rare in Olmen's lowlands, appear in Olmec art as places where humans and gods emerge from openings, reflecting the widespread belief that caves served as portals to the supernatural world. Some depictions show these entrances as the gaping mouths of the Olmec dragon, linking the natural landscape to cosmic forces. Paintings in Guerrero caves, attributed to Olmec artists, suggest they traveled far to seek out sacred sites, perhaps as much for religious reasons as for political or economic ones. Who oversaw these rituals? Most likely the rulers themselves, who combined political power with sacred authority, reinforcing their status as mediators between the human and divine realms. This did not make Olmec society a formal theocracy, but meant that no strict separation existed between secular and religious roles. Alongside rulers, there were surely full-time priests devoted to specific cults, as well as shamans who specialized in healing and trance-induced journeys to the spirit world. Evidence for shamanic practice is strong. Figurines show humans transforming into jaguars, and F. Kent Riley III has even outlined sequences depicting the transformation process, from kneeling human to fully jaguarized being. Such changes may have been linked to hallucinogenic substances like strong native tobacco, or toxins from the marine toad Buphus marinus, whose bones have been found in Olmec deposits. The artifacts associated with Olmec rituals, figurines, masks, celts, mirrors, bloodletters, and other objects, are charged with sacred symbolism. Some pointed tools, often called stilettos, may have been used in bloodletting rituals, while spoon-like objects might have served to prepare or ingest hallucinogens. Though direct evidence of drug use remains elusive, most scholars agree that mind-altering substances likely played a role in Olmec religious practices. The Olmec sphere reached far beyond the Gulf lowlands of Olmen, extending its influence into wide areas of Mexico and Central America. After 1500 BC, Mesoamerica experienced a cultural awakening as complex societies emerged in Chiapas and Olmen, followed soon after by groups in central Mexico and Oaxaca. These early communities shared a farming economy based on maize, beans, squash, chilies, and, where conditions allowed, cotton. Families lived in small villages, building simple homes of perishable materials, and relied on pottery and stone tools for daily tasks. Larger villages served as the seats of loosely organized chiefdoms, led by figures whose power was reflected in their elaborate homes, distinctive ornaments, richly equipped burials, and their ability to mobilize labor for temples and public works. By 1200 BC, San Lorenzo had become Mesoamerica's most advanced and organized society. Neighboring groups shared many basic traits with the Olmecs, but lacked their urban scale, monumental architecture, stone sculpture, elite crafts, distinct art style, and symbolic iconography. After this point, Olmec traders began forging direct ties with leaders in Chiapas, Central America, Oaxaca, Guerrero, and central Mexico, bringing with them the hallmarks of Olmec civilization. Local elites quickly adopted and reshaped these ideas about rulership, society, and ritual, adapting them to their own traditions. Over time, these practices evolved into new cultural forms, still visibly marked by Olmec influence, but increasingly distinct. Through this process, the Olmecs became what scholars call Mesoamerica's mother culture, a source of worldview, ideology, and elite identity that spread widely after 1200 BC and remained influential in altered form until the Spanish conquest. Trade had already been a feature of Mesoamerican life before the rise of San Lorenzo, with obsidian and other raw materials moving across long distances through chains of local exchanges. But around 1200 BC, Olmec merchants began to travel far from their homeland to obtain exotic goods directly. These expeditions brought them into contact with peoples of unfamiliar languages and customs, yet they succeeded in building strong partnerships with local rulers. There is little evidence to suggest the Olmecs created an empire or conquered large territories. Instead, they likely ensured safe passage through diplomacy, gift-giving, marriage alliances, and personal ties with foreign elites. From their perspective, the political map of Mesoamerica probably resembled an archipelago of allied communities stretching southeast into Central America and westward into Oaxaca, the Balsas Basin, and central Mexico. The scale and impact of these interactions remain debated. In 1942, Alfonso Caso proposed that all later Mesoamerican civilizations derived from an Olmec mother culture. His argument, supported by Miguel Covarrubias and Matthew Sterling, met resistance from Mayanists like J.E.S. Thompson. Yet today, many archaeologists accept the idea, though dissent continues. The debate hinges on the concept of Olmec horizons, brief episodes of intense cultural interaction visible in the archaeological record. When powerful societies interact with weaker ones, it is common for the latter to adopt symbols, practices, and ideas of their more prestigious neighbors. Two major Olmec horizons are widely recognized. The early horizon, circa 1200/1150 to 900 BC, centered at San Lorenzo, spread Olmec ceramic styles, motifs like the jaguar paw wing, and hollow baby face figurines across Mesoamerica. The late horizon, circa 850 to 500 BC, based at La Venta, is marked by monumental stone sculptures, narrative relief carvings, finely incised pottery with the double-line break motif, and extensive use of carved greenstone objects. Recently, John Clark and Mary Pye proposed a third horizon, the Monumental phase, 1000 to 800 BC, based in central Mexico, though this remains under discussion. The mechanism behind these horizons was almost certainly trade, rather than colonization, conquest, or proselytizing. By 1200 BC, Olmec merchants were reaching highland and Pacific Guatemala, Oaxaca, and central Mexico in search of obsidian, jade, serpentine, iron ores, oris, basalt, cacao, salt, shells, pelts, and exotic feathers. In some cases, they tapped into existing networks. In others, they created demand for new materials and even settled near source areas. Local rulers recognized the prestige that came from associating with Olmecs, adopting their symbols of rulership, and, at times, forming marriage alliances with them. Over generations, these relationships rose and fell with changing fortunes, leaving archaeologists only fragments of what must have been a complex and dynamic web of interactions. The humid Piedmonts and coastal plains of southern Chiapas and Guatemala, later known as the homeland of the classic Maya, played a crucial role in the earlier Olmec world. Among these, the Soconusco region of southeastern Chiapas was especially important. Renowned in later Aztec times for its fine cacao, the Soconusco maintained exceptionally close ties with the Olmec heartland, at times functioning almost like an outer hinterland of Olmen itself. During the early formative period, the Mocaya, the maize people, in Mixozoquian, established some of Mesoamerica's earliest chiefdoms at sites such as Paso de la Amada. Excavations reveal steady growth in population, social complexity, and cultural sophistication throughout the second millennium BC. Small farming villages gradually coalesced into chiefdoms that expanded in size and power. San Lorenzo's Olmecs built strong contacts with Mocaya leaders, who soon adopted many Olmec practices and symbols. Both San Lorenzo and its Mocaya partners experienced decline around the 10th century BC, but a century later, Venta's rulers forged fresh alliances in Chiapas. Archaeologists have long recognized these enduring connections, though only in recent decades has their full significance been widely appreciated. The Mocaya were innovators credited with many firsts in Mesoamerican history. They established the earliest permanent villages, developed the first effective farming systems, created the oldest securely dated pottery, and built the region's first hierarchical societies. Their close ties with the Olmecs were natural, not only because they likely spoke related Proto-Mixozoquian languages, but also because they shared similar levels of social development and enjoyed direct communication routes across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and via the rivers flowing from the Gulf lowlands. From the Pacific coast, Olmec elites could obtain prized resources like cacao, cotton, salt, exotic bird feathers, and jaguar and crocodile skins, as well as access to Guatemala's highland sources of obsidian, jadeite, serpentine, and quetzal feathers. The clearest evidence of these connections comes from Paso de la Amada, a major Mocaya village near the Guatemalan border. Archaeologists have traced 6 cultural phases there between 1650 and 900 BC. Farmers of the Bara phase, 1550 to 1400 BC, lived in pole and thatch houses on earthen floors. Though they cultivated maize and other crops, they also relied on fish, shellfish, and wild game. Some scholars even argue that maize was initially used more for brewing beer, similar to Andean chicha, consumed during ritual occasions, rather than as a daily staple. Their pottery, the oldest known in Mesoamerica, is remarkably refined. Thin-walled bowls and tecomates, decorated with slips in 1 to 3 colors, along with incised and stamped motifs. Many vessel shapes imitated gourds, suggesting that ceramics first replaced traditional gourd containers, possibly as prestigious items used in ritual feasts involving maize beer, chocolate, or other valued drinks. As populations expanded during the Locona and Ocos phases, 1400 to 1100 BC, agriculture became more central and complex chiefdoms emerged. At Paso de la Amada, archaeologists uncovered 51 earthen mounds across a 50-hectare core settlement, which may have housed about 1,500 people out of a total population of 4,000. The largest, Mound 6, served as the residence of successive ruling families over several generations. Beneath its earliest floor, a polished jade axe was carefully buried, marking its special significance. One of the houses atop the mound, measuring an impressive 22 by 10 meters, contained luxury items such as finely made pottery, stone bowls, hollow effigy figurines, ornaments of greenstone and mica, and iron ore mirrors, objects far beyond the reach of ordinary farmers. The most remarkable discovery at Paso de la Amada was Mesoamerica's earliest known ball court, built around 1400 to 1200 BC. This formal structure, with parallel mounds, facing benches, and a long alley nearly 80 meters long, demonstrates that leaders could organize large communal labor projects, likely accompanied by feasting. More importantly, it shows that the sacred ball game, a defining element of Mesoamerican religion and cosmology, was already institutionalized at the dawn of settled village life. How did Mochaya chiefs maintain and expand their power? Scholars such as John Clark and Michael Blake suggest that ambitious men enhanced their prestige by hosting large feasts with ritual displays and by distributing exotic goods like obsidian. Much like the big men of Highland New Guinea, these leaders gained influence by generosity and charisma, attracting larger followings until they commanded the loyalty of entire communities. Over time, high status became hereditary, and power and wealth were concentrated in the hands of ruling families. At Paso de la Amada, chiefs controlled access to obsidian from Guatemalan sources such as Tajumulco, San Martin, Jilotepeque, and El Chayal, along with other rare resources. Yet political power depended on more than material goods. It also rested on claims of special ties to the supernatural. By 1300 BC, the chiefs on Mound 6 had consolidated control over the entire chiefdom, paralleling similar developments among the Olmecs at San Lorenzo. By 1150 BC, Olmec merchants began arriving in the Soconusco, intensifying contact until Mochaya society underwent a process scholars call the Olmecization of the Mochaya. This cultural transformation, identified by Clark and Mary Pye, unfolded in 3 stages and culminated by 1000 BC, when Mochaya society was thoroughly reorganized along Olmec lines. The regional center shifted to Canton Corralito, possibly through an Olmec-led takeover of the Mazatán region. Local elites abandoned older symbols and traditions, replacing them with Olmec-style pottery, figurines, and deity images. Chiefs displayed their new identities by wearing Olmec ornaments, using imported ceramics, and commissioning Olmec-style stone sculptures carved by itinerant artists from San Lorenzo. At sites like Álvaro Obregón and Buena Vista, these monuments depict local rulers in full Olmec regalia, visual proof of their integration into the wider Olmec world. By around 950 BC, the Mochaya of the Soconusco were as thoroughly Olmecized as any group outside the Gulf lowlands could be, but they were far from unique. By this time, Olmec merchants and travelers had already extended their reach into the highlands of Chiapas, and even further south into Honduras and El Salvador. Traces of San Lorenzo-style pottery and figurines have been uncovered across the Chiapas Mountains, at sites such as Chiapa de Corzo, Mirador sur Plumajillo, Padre Piedra, San Felipe, Santa Rosa, Amatal, Vista Hermosa, Maritano, and Rio Totopac. The most intriguing of these is Mirador Plumajillo, located in the Chintalapa Valley west of Chiapa de Corzo. Excavations there revealed native iron ore deposits and a workshop littered with thousands of partly worked and broken blocks of magnetite and ilmenite, along with chert drills, tools, and even a fragment of an iron ore mirror. These materials were found directly alongside San Lorenzo-style pottery and figurines. Archaeologist Pierre Agrinier concluded that colonists from San Lorenzo had founded a mining outpost here, making it the only known Olmec colony outside their homeland. Supporting this idea, Anne Cyphers later recovered several tons of nearly identical iron ore blocks at San Lorenzo, many in contexts that also yielded mirror fragments. Although no clear early Olmec horizon remains have yet been identified in the Guatemalan highlands east of Chiapas, evidence suggests that San Lorenzo imported obsidian from the El Chayal quarries near modern Guatemala City and greenstone from the Sierra de las Minas further along the Motagua River Valley. Similarly, little was known of Honduras until Rosemary Joyce and John Henderson uncovered a long, early formative sequence at Puerto Escondido on the Caribbean coast. Here, archaic foragers were followed after 1600 BC by early farming communities who used pottery resembling that of the Soconusco. By the Chotepe phase, 1100 to 900 BC, vessels with Olmec-style forms and surface treatments appeared, indicating new connections with the wider southern Mesoamerican world. Whether Olmec traders were directly responsible is uncertain, but contact of some kind was clearly underway. Scholars John Clark and Mary Pye have described the early Olmec horizon, 1200 to 900 BC, as only a brief episode in a much longer history of interactions between Olmen and its neighbors. Yet this initial spread paved the way for a more expansive and transformative stage, the late Olmec horizon, roughly 850 to 500 BC. Driven by the rulers of La Venta, this horizon saw Olmec symbols, ideas, and practices spread widely across Chiapas and into northern Central America. In these regions, social stratification, monumental architecture, public art, and long-distance trade appeared for the first time. Local groups adopted Olmec-inspired architectural designs, stone carvings, ceramics, and jade ornaments. Some scholars even argue that Olmecs influenced local diets and religious practices, particularly the broader cultivation of maize and the worship of the Olmec maize god. In western Guatemala, the village of La Blanca rose to prominence during the Conchas phase, 850 to 650 BC. Its monumental mound 1 to 25 meters high and 100 meters wide dominated the settlement. Excavations revealed a mix of local and Olmec-style ceramics, numerous jade ornaments, mica jewelry, and fragments of carved Olmec-style stones. Additional sculptures from the region reinforce its importance. The Tuxtla Chico dancing jaguar, which portrays a standing anthropomorphic jaguar, and another figure from nearby Ojo de Agua, dressed in elaborate costume, resembling a modern fantasy character. A third famous piece, the enigmatic Young Lord, or Slim, a 65-centimeter serpentine figurine now in a private U.S. collection, also likely originated near La Blanca. Wearing a tall headdress, mask, and loincloth, and holding two celts to his chest, his body is incised with intricate designs. Some scholars see him as a shaman, others as a ruler depicted at the moment of accession, or perhaps as both. His costume reflects one of the richest displays of Olmec rulership imagery known outside the heartland. Further evidence of the late Olmec horizon comes from sites across Chiapas, where Olmec-style pyramids, long mounds, and Acropolis-like platforms appeared at places like San Isidro, La Libertad, Chiapa de Corzo, and Finca Acapulco. Stone sculptures also emerged across the region, many carved in low relief on natural boulders, with thematic ties to La Venta's art. These monuments generally depict either single figures, perhaps rulers, gods, or impersonators, or groups in ritual or courtly scenes. Maize imagery is common, supporting the view that the Olmec maize god had become central to elite symbolism. For example, the Pijijipan monument shows a male ruler flanked by 2 women and attendants, perhaps recording a marriage alliance with Olmec ties. Interestingly, these monuments are often located in remote passes and mountain approaches rather than in community centers, suggesting they may have marked boundaries, pilgrimage routes, or trade pathways. In addition, numerous late Olmec-style caches of jade celts, ornaments, and pottery offerings have been excavated, with San Isidro providing particularly rich examples before much of it was submerged by a dam project. Together, this evidence demonstrates that by the late Olmec horizon, Olmec influence was not limited to trade goods, but had penetrated deeply into the social, religious, and political fabric of Chiapas and Guatemala, reshaping local traditions into new hybrid forms, while still bearing the unmistakable stamp of Olmec civilization. Most celts found in Chiapas are plain, but a few carved examples stand out. The most famous is the Simojoval celt, a large black slate artifact decorated with the profile of an Olmec face wearing an elaborate headdress surrounded by intricate glyph-like designs. A similar piece has been reported from Escuintla, Guatemala. The Piedmont and coastal plains of Guatemala are dotted with late formative centers, often built over earlier settlements. Among the most important is Abaj Takalik, where archaeologists have identified 57 sculptures carved from local andesite, 4 of which display clear Olmec traits. Monument 23, for instance, may have begun as an Olmec colossal head, but was later reworked into the image of a seated figure in a niche cradling a child. This sequence reverses the San Lorenzo practice of reshaping thrones into colossal heads. Other Olmec-style carvings from the site include a squatting figure in a helmet and breechcloth holding animals, and several other pieces that show the site's significance to Olmec activity. Since the 1970s, research at Abaj Takalik has uncovered important evidence, though full publication is still awaited. Another remarkable find is the Shuk panel from San Antonio, Suchitepeques, a circular stone carving of 2 contortionists in an extraordinary composition. Rescued from the black market by archaeologist Edwin Shuk, it remains one of the most striking works of Mesoamerican art. Not far from Abaj Takalik lies the large village of El Mezak, which may have served as a station along an Olmec trade route through the coastal lowlands. After about 950 BC, its leaders began adopting Olmec practices and artifacts, including imported obsidian, jadeite axes, babyface figurines, and pottery decorated with hallmark Olmec motifs, such as cleft heads, flame eyebrows, clover leaves, and even a full depiction of a were-jaguar. One 6.5-meter mound, built with layers of colored sand, strongly recalls the construction style of La Venta's Complex A. From El Mezak, Olmec traders likely moved southeast to Chalchuapa in El Salvador. During the Colos phase, 900 to 600 BC, inhabitants there erected a massive conical mound resembling La Venta's Great Pyramid. They also used Olmec-style pottery, figurines, jade celts, and clay stamps. Most notably, they commissioned Monument 12, the southeasternmost Olmec-style monumental sculpture yet known. This boulder carving shows 4 men. 3 bearing staffs or bundles approach a seated figure who also holds a staff. Their postures and attire echo those seen in La Venta and other Olmec-influenced regions. The scene may represent an actual meeting between Olmec emissaries and a local ruler who had adopted Olmec regalia. Chalchuapa may thus have been an Olmec outpost on the farthest edge of their sphere of influence, since no other site in northern Central America has produced such direct evidence of contact with the Olmec heartland. Honduras functioned as a cultural crossroads, where Mesoamerican traditions blended into those of lower Central America and even northern South America. Between 1000 and 600 BC, Olmecs maintained intermittent contacts with the region, likely through intermediaries such as Chalchuapa, rather than by direct colonization. At Copan, later a major Maya city, the earliest Rio phase settlers, 1300 to 900 BC, left pottery with early Olmec horizon traits. During the subsequent Uir phase, 900 to 300 BC, 47 burials were discovered, including burial 827, an exceptionally rich interment containing pottery vessels, nearly 300 jade ornaments, and symbolic offerings such as jaguar claw-shaped pendants. The associated vessels were decorated with Olmec motifs like flame eyebrows, paw wings, sharks, and serpents. Some burials high above the Copan Valley also contained Olmec-style ceramics. Yet the absence of Olmec monumental sculpture suggests indirect contact, with goods arriving via trade rather than direct Gulf Coast connections. At Puerto Escondido, on the Chamelecon River, inhabitants built a stepped platform around 900 BC at the same time that Olmec-style pottery appeared in the region. These ceramics included black, gray, and brown polished wares, as well as two-tone white and black vessels decorated with typical San Lorenzo motifs, like stars, crosses, and paw wings. Human burials within the platform containing jade ornaments suggest that Olmec symbols of power had been adopted into local leadership traditions. Another Honduran site, Playa de los Muertos, has produced numerous formative period burials with artifacts resembling those of Los Naranjos and Chalchuapa, but also remarkably similar to early Olmec horizon objects from the Basin of Mexico. These included stirrup spout vessels, effigy pots, incised decorations, white-slipped and double-headed figurines, and clay stamps. Comparable finds have also been recorded at Yarumela on the Comayagua River, further illustrating how far Olmec influence reached, even if mediated by other local cultures. The large settlement of Los Naranjos, located on the shores of Lake Yojoa in the Honduran highlands, seems to have drawn occasional Olmec visitors during the Gerald phase, 800 to 400 BC. The site is notable for its sizable mounds, a defensive ditch, and several stone monuments, one of which is a powerful Olmecoid human torso, whose sculptural quality has been compared to both Olmec art and the works of Rodin. Other Olmec-style finds include a jadeite axe coated with red cinnabar, an elite burial stocked with jade ornaments and ceramic vessels, and a figurine crafted in Olmec style. The presence of fortifications suggests a period of unrest, though whether Olmecs played any direct role in such conflicts remains uncertain. During the Middle Formative period, villagers in several regions of Honduras practiced a distinctive mortuary cult centered on caves in remote mountain landscapes. Evidence of this has been found in the Copan Valley, the Cuyamel Caves near the Aguan River's headwaters, and at Talgua Cave in northeastern Honduras. These caverns contained hundreds of burials with offerings of pottery and greenstone objects, many in late Olmec horizon styles. The interments were often secondary, with cleaned bones, vessels, and ornaments deposited in niches and hidden passages. At Talgua Cave, dripping water encased some skeletons in layers of calcite, creating the effect of glowing skulls. Surveys around the caves revealed little evidence of permanent habitation, suggesting that the dead were transported from distant communities for burial in these sacred places. This cave burial tradition was likely a local practice, though it incorporated Olmec-style objects and symbols. Nonetheless, the Olmecs themselves are known to have conducted rituals in caves in Guerrero and perhaps elsewhere, making the connection a matter of continuing debate. Costa Rica is well known for the hundreds of greenstone pendants, axe gods, and ornaments found in tombs dating to later periods, but at least 15 examples appear to be Olmec or influenced by Olmec style. These include a pendant in the form of a winged figure, a paw wing motif pendant from Guanacaste, and a finely polished spoon. With no other evidence of Olmec presence in the region, these artifacts were likely heirlooms that arrived centuries after the peak of Olmec civilization. One of the major puzzles of early Mesoamerican history is the lack of dense human settlement in the Maya lowlands of Yucatan, Belize, and the Guatemalan Petén before about 800 BC. Although scattered earlier remains have been identified, the region as a whole remained sparsely inhabited until around 600 to 500 BC. Because of this, the Olmecs probably had little reason or opportunity to explore the area. The only direct evidence for contact between early Maya and Olmecs comes from Cibal, near Olmen's eastern frontier, where real phase villagers, 900 to 600 BC, buried cache 7 in a cruciform pit. This cache, strongly reminiscent of Venta offerings, contained 5 middle formative pottery vessels, 6 jadeite celts, and a jadeite bloodletter. Other finds in the Maya region hint at Olmec influence, though they were probably heirlooms. These include a remarkable cache of jadeite spoons and ornaments discovered by farmers at Chaxincan in southern Yucatan, and a greenstone pendant recovered from a much later burial on Cozumel Island. Some scholars, such as David Freitel, have suggested that Venta Olmecs may have been directly involved in salt extraction and trade along the Gulf coasts of Campeche and Yucatan. It is also possible that they operated a settlement or colony at the Sierra de las Minas in Guatemala's Motagua Basin, the main source of jadit used throughout Mesoamerica. The first groups to settle in western Mesoamerica were hunter-gatherers who took advantage of the region's abundant natural resources. Over time, their descendants began cultivating early strains of maize and other plants, likely as early as the mid-4th millennium BC. By the initial formative period, 1800 to 1200 BC, people lived in permanent villages, farmed a large portion of their food, and produced pottery. Archaeologists refer to this early farming tradition as the red-on-buff horizon, named for its distinctive pottery of brown or buff clay decorated with red-painted designs. Settlements from this horizon have been identified across the basin of Mexico, Morelos, Puebla, Oaxaca, Guerrero, and western Mexico. These communities were typically small clusters of pole and thatch houses built on higher ground near rivers or lakes, which provided fertile farmland, plentiful fish and waterfowl, and access to wild plants and animals. Each household maintained outdoor workspaces, trash areas, and conical storage pits, while the dead were interred beneath or beside the homes. Alongside maize fields, families tended house gardens and supplemented their diet with wild resources and domestic dogs. Temples and ball courts are not clearly documented from this period, though in Oaxaca, a few larger buildings may represent early elite residences or public structures. Around 1200 BC, the Tlatilco culture emerged in select areas of the basin of Mexico and its surroundings. At that time, the basin was a fertile highland valley with forested slopes, rich soils, and numerous streams feeding marshes and shallow lakes. Today, the same valley forms the site of sprawling Mexico City, whose urban expansion, pollution, and ecological damage have drastically altered the landscape. In Tlatilco times, however, the environment was far more abundant and largely untouched by human pressure. The main Tlatilco culture sites were Tlatilco, Tlapacoya, and Coapexco, all flourishing during the early formative Ayotla, 1250 to 1000 BC, and Manantial, 1000 to 800 BC, phases. Tlatilco and Tlapacoya functioned as regional centers of small chiefdoms, while Coapexco was a smaller settlement known for its stone tool production. Unlike earlier red-on-buff villages, these sites exhibited larger populations, social stratification, craft specialization, religious practitioners, and long-distance exchange networks. Material remains include a wide array of utilitarian and ceremonial ceramics, human and animal figurines, masks, ritual items, and elaborate burials. Though Tlatilco and Tlapacoya shared much in common, each had distinctive ritual objects and ceramic motifs that may reflect differences in ideology or community identity. Tlatilco has long been at the center of debates since Miguel Covarrubias identified Olmec-style motifs and figurines there over 60 years ago. Scholars questioned whether Tlatilco was an Olmec colony, a rival center, or an independent culture influenced by Gulf Coast traditions. Some even speculated that the basin of Mexico might have been unsuitable for early civilization due to its elevation and climate. Excavations and research now suggest that while Tlatilco was heavily influenced by Olmec ideas, it developed as its own chiefdom within a favorable highland environment. The village of Tlatilco covered about 65 hectares, 160 acres, on Los Remedios Hill, overlooking the Hondo River near Lake Texcoco. Its location offered fertile farmland, hunting, and access to wetland resources. Before the site was destroyed by modern urban growth, thousands of ceramic vessels and figurines were removed by brickmakers, looters, and later archaeologists. By the 1930s, burials containing beautiful hand-modeled figurines and pottery had attracted artists like Miguel Covarrubias and Diego Rivera, as well as collectors. Looting soon became rampant until Covarrubias organized the first formal excavation in 1941, followed by several projects led by Inne archaeologists in the decades that followed. Tlapacoya occupied a volcanic island in Lake Chalco-Xochimilco at the southern edge of the basin. Its dramatic natural setting, with pink andesite, springs, and grottos, may have been considered sacred by its inhabitants. The site grew into a large, early formative settlement, comparable in importance to Tlatilco. Unfortunately, modern highway construction and unchecked looting have destroyed much of it, erasing what was once one of ancient Mexico's most important sites. Salvage excavations and surveys, however, revealed a long sequence of occupation, along with Olmec-style pottery, figurines, and even rock paintings near the summit that may have served as part of a ritual zone. Coapexco, located high in the Amacameca Pass, linking the basin of Mexico to Puebla at 2,600 meters, 8,515 feet, was another Tlatilco culture site. While the elevation made maize farming difficult, the climate may have been more favorable during the early formative. The villagers compensated by producing grinding tools such as manos and metates, as well as processing obsidian from distant sources into finished tools. Their settlement lay along an important trade route, giving them an economic role despite their marginal agricultural conditions. Coapexco, however, was short-lived and abandoned after only a few generations. Excavations at Tlatilco reveal much about the people who lived there and how they presented themselves. The villagers were generally short but sturdy, with men averaging about 1.65 meters, 5 feet 5 inches, and women about 6 centimeters shorter. High-status families deliberately altered the appearance of their infants by flattening their skulls with cradle boards, and adults sometimes filed their teeth into patterns, practices tied to ideals of beauty and social distinction. Health conditions were difficult, as was common in ancient societies, with many adults suffering from arthritis and dental decay, while child mortality and deaths among young mothers were especially frequent. Houses were modest yet functional, typically ranging from 12 to 30 square meters, with beaten earth or sand floors, walls of clay-coated daub sometimes painted red, and hearths marked by stone settings. Subterranean bell-shaped pits served for storage before being reused as refuse dumps filled with broken pottery, animal remains, stone tools, and charred plants, evidence of a diverse diet. At Coapexco, houses rested directly on the ground, while at Tlatilco and Tlapacoya, clay-surfaced platforms may have supported elite homes, temples, or special buildings. The sheer number of burials led some early scholars to believe Tlatilco was primarily a cemetery, though it was clearly a thriving community. The dead were typically laid in simple pits beneath or beside their homes, usually oriented east-west, but sometimes north-south, which one archaeologist suggested might reflect two social groups or marriage exchange alliances. Grave offerings varied widely, from none at all for poorer individuals to lavish sets of goods for the elite. Common items included pots, figurines, obsidian tools, and ornaments, sometimes accompanied by ritual burning at the gravesite. One high-ranking woman was buried with 15 pots, 20 figurines, jade ornaments, a hematite plaque, and other exotic objects. Another man, whose skull had been reshaped in infancy and whose teeth were filed into geometric forms, was interred with ritual gear, suggesting he may have been a shaman. His grave goods included miniature methods used for grinding hallucinogenic mushrooms, effigy mushroom figurines, quartz, graphite, and other unusual items. A ceramic bottle in his grave depicted an acrobat or contortionist twisting so that his feet touched his head. A possible portrait of the man himself. Tlatilco potters were among the most skilled artisans of pre-Columbian America. Likely women, they worked without advanced kilns or molds, but produced vessels of remarkable beauty. Common shapes included round bottles with tall necks, stirrup spout jars, teacomates, flat-bottomed bowls, and composite profile forms, while rarer types included ring-shaped vessels, trays with spouts, and hollow effigies of humans, animals, and plants. Surfaces were carefully treated with slips in shades of black, brown, and red, then decorated with incisions, burnishing, excisions, rocker stamping, or polished and matte contrasts. They often rubbed red hematite into designs to highlight the patterns. Motifs included triangles, spirals, and cross-hatching, as well as distinctly Olmec symbols such as flame eyebrows, paw wings, four-petaled flowers, and cleft-headed figures sprouting plants. Tlapacoya specialized in producing unique ritual bowls known as dragon pots, cylindrical vessels with incised images of the were-jaguar deity, sometimes identified as the banded eye god. These vessels, decorated with almond-shaped eyes, cleft heads, bulbous noses, and flaring lips, were widely distributed across central Mexico, but appear to have been manufactured mainly at Tlapacoya. Their iconography suggests a religious center devoted to this enigmatic supernatural figure. Artisans at Tlatilco also made clay roller stamps and masks. The stamps, decorated with paw wing and other Olmec motifs, may have been used to imprint tattoo-like designs on skin or clothing. Once dismissed as decorative novelties, their significance has been reconsidered after the discovery of a roller stamp with the earliest known Mesoamerican glyphs at San Andres, dating to around 600 BC. Clay masks found in burials and collections often had cut-out eyes and mouths, with some portraying elderly men, grotesque expressions, or even split faces combining a living human and a skull, perhaps symbolizing duality. The thousands of human and animal figurines crafted at Tlatelolco provide vivid glimpses of daily life, clothing, and ritual practices. Most were small, solid effigies, usually of women, though hollow figures were also produced in smaller numbers. Many show women dancing, holding infants, or visibly pregnant. Certain figurine types highlight women with jewelry, painted bodies, and elaborate hairstyles or turbans, while others depict pretty ladies with exaggerated features and fine adornments. Yet not all were idealized. Some figurines portray deformities such as two heads, multiple eyes or mouths, hunchbacks, or twisted features. A medical researcher has even proposed that some represent the rare condition known as diprosopis, making them possibly the earliest known attempts to depict congenital disorders. Representations of men in Tlatelolco and Tlapacoya are relatively scarce, and when they do appear, they often show ball players, acrobats, or musicians. At Tlapacoya, distinctive solid male figurines have been found wearing tall headgear, ear ornaments, and wide belts with round objects, possibly mirrors, attached at the front, along with bands at their legs, ankles, and wrists. Some may depict participants in ritual ball games, while others could symbolize different kinds of public ceremonies. Another striking group, the Pili-style figurines, show men with intentionally reshaped skulls, partially shaved or completely bald heads, and stars incised into the backs of their heads. Christine Niederberger suggested that these may have been actual portraits of real individuals marked with such symbols. The purpose of these figurines has long been debated. While none appear to represent gods, their presence in burials points to ritual use, yet most are recovered as broken fragments from household refuse, and the repeated ways in which they were broken suggest deliberate destruction. Why this was done is unclear. Some scholars, such as Joyce Marcus, argue that figurines may have been linked to household divination rituals and intentionally destroyed at the end of the ceremony, similar to practices known in Oaxaca. Others have suggested they were children's toys, though this interpretation is considered less convincing. Tlatelolco artisans also created large hollow effigies of humans and animals. Two major types can be distinguished: a localized group known mainly from the basin of Mexico and Puebla, and the widely recognized white-slipped Olmec-style figures commonly called hollow babies. The localized type often portrays dwarfs, possibly individuals with achondroplasia. Female figures are usually seated with large heads, small arms, small breasts, and pronounced navels. Some wear elaborate headdresses or pillbox-style coiffures, while male figures occasionally display horn-like projections from their heads, possibly as shamanic symbols or as a hairstyle. Hollow animal effigies include ducks, parrots, fish, armadillos, opossums, dogs, and peccary, though deer, despite being an important food source, are notably absent. The whiteware hollow babies are among the most distinctive markers of the early Olmec horizon, found across many regions of Mesoamerica. Michael D. Coe described them as the jaguar's children, supernatural beings thought to be the offspring of a human mother, and a jaguar father, associated with thunder, lightning, and rain. Typically nude and usually without clear sexual traits, they are portrayed as plump infants with downturned mouths, slanted eyes, and often a vaguely feline expression. Only a handful of complete examples have been recovered in scientific excavations, with most known pieces lacking archaeological context. Their polished surfaces range from white to orange, and they usually sit with spread or crossed legs. Some unusual variants depict babies crawling, sucking fingers, or even adults presented in infant-like bodies, one famous example wearing an Olmec dragon headdress. Their rarity and broad distribution suggest they were symbolic ritual objects produced by itinerant craftsmen for elite patrons in different regions. The communities of the basin were also connected to broader exchange networks. They exported locally made pottery, figurines, and obsidian from sources such as Otumba and Pachuca, and imported goods from distant regions: pottery from Oaxaca and Morelos, greenstone from Guerrero, marine shells from the Pacific, cotton from Morelos, and other exotic resources. In Puebla, early formative settlements were concentrated in the Tehuacan Valley, though sites like Las Bocas and Atlihuayan are mostly known through looted artifacts that began appearing on the antiquities market in the late 1950s. These include black ware vessels with excised Olmec motifs highlighted in red pigment, fine white kaolin wares, roller stamps with Olmec imagery, large hollow animal effigies, and the well-known hollow babies. Atlihuayan produced one of the most spectacular of these, uncovered during road construction. Although looting destroyed much of the archaeological context, these finds demonstrate that Puebla's valleys were deeply involved in the early Olmec horizon. In western Morelos, red-on-buff and Tlatilco-style farmers established early villages, with only a few sites yielding evidence of Olmec influence during the early horizon. Among these, Gualupita, San Pablo Nexpa, and Chalcatzingo stand out. At Gualupita, disturbed burials uncovered in the 1930s led George Vaillant to salvage Olmec-style pottery and figurines, which he recognized as much earlier than the classic period civilizations then known. At San Pablo Nexpa, looters had disturbed an early burial mound by the time David C. Grove examined it in the 1960s, but he identified evidence of a large mortuary structure and recovered early formative ceramics and figurines with Olmec motifs. Chalcatzingo, however, flourished primarily during the late Horizon, and its discussion belongs to a later stage in the narrative. Guerrero has long been one of the least understood regions in Mesoamerican archaeology, a kind of blank spot on the cultural map. This is particularly frustrating because looters have recovered many Olmec-style jade objects from across the state. Decades ago, Miguel Covarrubias collected several of these outstanding artifacts, and although he correctly recognized them as Olmec, he mistakenly argued that the Olmecs had originated in Guerrero and later migrated to the Gulf Coast. Among the many notable objects from Guerrero, 4 stand out: a finely crafted greenstone mask from San Geronimo, the famous Olinala plaque, a curious hollowed stone Yuguito carved with a typical Olmec face, and a unique wooden mask covered with jade mosaic from Cañón de la Mano. If the Olmecs did not begin in Guerrero, the questions remain. Who made these pieces, and how did they arrive there? Efforts to answer these mysteries began in the 1960s when Charles and Ellen Brush excavated near Acapulco, uncovering fragments of pox pottery, a pock-marked early formative ware that suggests Guerrero was inhabited as early as 1800 BC. Later, Yale researchers Louise Thefer Paradis and John S. Henderson investigated sites along the Balsas River and eastern Guerrero, identifying small early formative settlements, but no major Olmec centers. The breakthrough came in 1983, when Mexican archaeologist Guadalupe Martinez Don Juan learned of looting at a large site near the confluence of the Mezcala-Balsas and Amacuzac rivers. Her excavations revealed Teopantecuanitlan, a major early and middle formative center decorated with Olmec-style sculpture. The heart of the site was the sunken patio, a large rectangular court framed by natural hills and artificial platforms. Built in 4 phases between 1200 and 600 BC, its third phase, 1000 to 800 BC, included stone stairways flanked by balustrades carved with stylized feline heads. 4 monumental sculptures of were-jaguars, each with almond-shaped eyes, flame-like eyebrows, and down-turned mouths, stood against the patio walls, holding torches or bundles. Scholars disagree on their meaning. Some see them as solar or agricultural markers, others as depictions of the maize god, or even as representations of sacred mountains anchoring the cosmos. The court itself also contained what may have been a small ball court, while a much larger one lay nearby. Intriguingly, hydraulic drains identical to those at San Lorenzo and La Venta suggest that the patio might have been deliberately flooded during rituals, creating the effect of the statues emerging from water. A powerful image in Guerrero's dry environment. The site also featured irrigation works, including a dam and stone-lined canals. Teopantecuanitlan's later phase, 800 to 600 BC, added other monuments, such as a frog-shaped altar and a large human head, resembling late formative carvings from Guatemala and El Salvador. Excavations in the residential zone of Lomeríos uncovered houses on low stone platforms, bell-shaped storage pits, and refuse containing maize pollen, along with remains of dogs, deer, rabbits, and aquatic animals. Local artisans crafted ornaments from Pacific shellfish, which were exported to sites like San Pablo Nexpa, Tlatilco, and Tlapacoya. The site declined after 700 BC, possibly as nearby Xochipala grew in importance, though looted pottery and figurines suggest Olmec influence lingered there as well. Martinez Don Juan has suggested that Teopantecuanitlan's people were genuine Olmecs, and even revived the theory that a group from Guerrero migrated to the Gulf Coast. Christine Niederberger, however, believed the site was locally rooted, with Gulf Olmec elements added once it rose to prominence. This pattern, she argued, paralleled that of Chalcatzingo. Around the same time, archaeologists were stunned by the discovery of Olmec-style cave paintings at Juxtlahuaca and Oxtotitlan, about 65 kilometers southeast of Chilpancingo. Created in vivid colors and complex compositions, they remain among the most sophisticated cave paintings in the Americas. At Juxtlahuaca, a life-sized ruler painted in polychrome towers over a smaller seated figure, wearing a headdress of green feathers, jaguar pelt leggings, and carrying ritual staffs. Other images show serpents, jaguars, and humans in dynamic poses, some even hinting at mythic unions between humans and felines, echoing the were-jaguar theme. Oxtotitlan's murals, painted high on a cliff face, include a seated ruler on the head of a jaguar monster, richly adorned in feathers and ornaments, directly linking Olmec imagery with rulership and cosmic symbolism. Other Guerrero caves hold less elaborate paintings, but their existence underscores the region's importance as a sacred landscape for Olmec ritual practice. These caves were difficult to reach, suggesting their inaccessibility was itself a feature of their sacredness. Some may have been associated with water, rain, and fertility rituals, while others emphasized themes of rulership, myth, and political power. Meanwhile, in Oaxaca, the fertile valleys nurtured early Zapotec and Mixtec societies. By the San Jose phase, 1150 to 850 BC, San Jose Mogote had become the valley's largest and most influential community, home to nearly half the valley's population. Structures 1 and 2, early stone-faced platforms, may have supported the region's first public buildings. Artifacts include carvings of felines and birds, as well as shell ornaments and small iron ore mirrors traded widely across western Mesoamerica, 2 of which have been identified as having reached San Lorenzo. These finds illustrate how early Oaxacan centers were tied into the wider Olmec world through trade, ideology, and shared artistic traditions. The rugged, arid slopes of today's Mixteca Alta hardly seem like a place where a great civilization could emerge. Yet its fertile valleys have sustained dense populations for thousands of years. In the Nochixtlan Valley, the most thoroughly studied part of this region, the earliest traces of settlement belong to the Red on Buff tradition's Cruz A phase, 1400 to 1200 BC. Later deposits from the Cruz B phase, 1200 to 900 BC, at Etlatongo produced a hollow, white-slipped Olmec-style hollow baby figurine, likely crafted by a traveling artisan from San Lorenzo. The Gulf Coast Olmecs forged lasting commercial and social ties with Oaxaca, fostering exchanges of prestige goods and ideas. Imports into Oaxaca probably included shells from the Gulf, conch shell trumpets, turtle shell drums, stingray spines, and armadillo shells, while San Jose Mogote exported ornaments and iron ore mirrors. Ceramic traditions reveal a close relationship. San Lorenzo and San Jose vessels share forms, motifs, and Olmec-inspired icons. Trade went both ways. San Lorenzo pottery, such as Xochitepec white and Mina white, reached Oaxaca, while Veracruz sites received San Jose types like Leandro Gray and Delfina Fine Gray. The appearance of Olmec motifs, such as were jaguars and fire serpents on Oaxacan pottery, has been interpreted in different ways. Some scholars, like Marcus Winter, argue they came from direct Olmec influence through visiting traders seeking magnetite and Pacific shells, while Kent Flannery and Joyce Marcus see Chalcatzingo's peak came during the Cantera phase, 700 to 500 BC, when rulers cultivated far-reaching contacts and commissioned Olmec-style bas-reliefs on the cliffs. At this time, the community stretched across 40 hectares, divided between a hillside ritual zone decorated with carvings and a residential civic zone of terraces with mounds, public buildings, a sunken patio, and numerous monuments. Terrace 1 remained the civic and ceremonial core, where elite residences and perhaps a palace rose beside a massive platform mound measuring 70 by 25 by 7 meters. This platform contained elite burials and Olmec-style artifacts, including a greenstone figurine closely matching those from La Venta's famous Offering 4. Other terraces held ceremonial structures. Terrace 6 had a cobblestone platform with stela bases and a round altar, while Terrace 25 featured a sunken stone-lined court with a large tabletop throne resembling those of San Lorenzo and La Venta, though built of many carved blocks rather than a single monolith. Beneath its floor lay over 20 human burials. Chalcatzingo's true distinction, however, lies in its extraordinary corpus of bas-reliefs. More than 30 carvings, placed high on the cliff faces, remain the most extensive collection of Olmec-style art outside the Gulf Coast. Scholars agree that these works were likely executed by Gulf Coast artisans employed by Chalcatzingo's rulers. 3 clusters of carvings have been identified. The first, high on the mountainside, includes Monument 1, El Rey, which shows a ruler seated in a cave-like niche within the maw of the earth monster, holding a ceremonial box while rain and clouds fall around. Smaller carvings nearby feature saurian creatures amid scrolls and raindrops, emphasizing fertility and rainfall. Positioned along a natural rainwater runoff, this cluster clearly links rulership to control over rain. The second cluster, carved on boulders at the mountain's base, portrays supernatural felines dominating humans. Some figures stand in ritual postures, while one slumps lifelessly, suggesting themes of sacrifice or submission. The third cluster, within the settlement itself, shifts focus to rulers and rulership. Stelae depict standing leaders, possibly including women, and were ritually broken, perhaps after the death of the individuals they represented. Monument 9, a thin stone slab bearing the frontal visage of the earth monster, was designed so offerings or even children could be passed through its mouth during rituals, reinforcing the deity's centrality in political and religious life. Grove interprets the entire arrangement as a cosmological template that merged natural and human-made landscapes. The mountains symbolized rain and fertility, their slopes inscribed with mythic imagery, while the terraces below hosted rulers' portraits, burials, and monuments proclaiming their divine sanction. This fusion of landscape, art, and power underpinned Chalcatzingo's authority, presenting its rulers as mediators with the supernatural forces of rain and fertility. Pilgrims and traders who visited the site reinforced its prestige, ensuring that Chalcatzingo became one of the most sacred and politically significant centers of late Olmec influence in western Mesoamerica. In this flourishing period, Chalcatzingo forged connections with powerful centers such as La Venta, Teopantecuanitlan, San Miguel Amuco, and others. Teopantecuanitlan, which had risen centuries before the start of Chalcatzingo's Cantera phase, may even have served as a model for Chalcatzingo's urban design. The two sites reveal striking architectural parallels. Both were deliberately positioned within their natural landscapes, featured artificial terraces, sunken courts, stone-faced mound platforms built with carefully cut rectangular blocks, and displayed Olmec-inspired sculptures. At Teopantecuanitlan, the north platform and the adjoining north esplanade contained sculptures and architectural features that seem to date after 700 BC, placing its later activity within the same time frame as Chalcatzingo's Cantera phase. Yet while Teopantecuanitlan blended local traditions with Olmec elements, the Olmec influence at Chalcatzingo is unmistakable, especially in its relief carvings and monuments, which clearly drew upon Gulf Coast artistic conventions. By around 500 BC, however, the era of far-reaching Olmec connections came to a close. The civilization that had once spread its influence across Mesoamerica faded, and direct contacts with distant regions ceased. In the centuries that followed, during the late formative period, 500 BC to AD 200, societies throughout Mesoamerica experienced rapid cultural development, with new centers rising and traditions evolving in diverse directions. The Gulf lowlands, once the beating heart of Olmec civilization, no longer held the same prominence. Instead, the lower Papaloapan River Valley became home to what archaeologists call the Epi-Olmec culture, a tradition rooted in earlier Olmec foundations, but developing in relative isolation in a region that had previously been something of a cultural periphery.